Chapter 680. That won't happen. Their main force is not around here. After all, this place is also our Khalkha tribe. If they send out their army without permission, it will cause a misunderstanding. But it is still possible for them to send 1,000 cavalry. No matter how powerful your cavalry is, it is still impossible for 100 to fight 1,000. Besides, your cavalry is not without weaknesses. Anyone can see that they are not fast enough. Once they are entangled in a battle of attrition, they will eventually lose. Tuoya's analysis made Yang Qindong nod his head. If the other party only sent 1,000 cavalry, then he had nothing to be afraid of. On the contrary, he could capture a large number of warhorses. Wasn't this taking the initiative to give him a gift? Thinking of this, Yang Qindong simply lay down on the blanket again. Since that is the case, this young master will wait for them here. I want to see what they can do to me. Yang Qindong's casual manner naturally caused an anxious expression to appear on Tuoya's face. Why aren't you leaving? Hey, do you really think I am joking with you? After calling out a few times, she did not see any movement from Yang Qindong. The anxious Tuoya said to Bao Yin, who was standing behind her, "Go, immediately inform my father and ask him to bring the army here." Princess. Bao Yin's face was filled with anxiety. "Princess, you'd better return with me. Wouldn't it be better for you to tell Khan personally? I go back? If I go back, will my father still bring people here to rescue? All right, go back alone and tell my father that if he does not send troops in time, he may never see his daughter again. Go, this is an order." Tuoya seemed to know that it was impossible to reason with Bao Yin, so she simply gave the order as her mistress. Sure enough, as soon as Yang Qindong said that, although Bao Yin still looked hesitant, she finally nodded. After glancing at Yang Qindong, she turned around and rode away quickly. Yang Heir, who was watching from the side, couldn't help but secretly give Tuoya a thumbs up for her actions. This girl had some eyesight. She could see that his young master was not ordinary. It was a wise move to befriend him now. Of course, it would be even better if she could repay him with her body. Although Yang Qindong now had 5 wives and concubines, and Luan Xiaoyu who was waiting to be married when she reached the age, he still did not have a single child. This not only made all the Yang Xie's senior officers anxious. It was always worrying to have no children, and they were also afraid that there would be no successor. However, as his subordinates, they really could not do anything. They could only hope that the young master had more women, which meant that there would be more opportunities. Seeing how big Tuoya's chest was, she should be able to give birth to children. Beta Persei was still discussing in his heart. Yang Qindong did not know about this. After seeing that Tuoya actually took the initiative to stay, he asked curiously, "Why aren't you leaving? Aren't you afraid that Lumek will bring his troops back? My cavalry won't be able to protect you. I was the one who brought the hatred. How can I leave? Do you think that we grassland women don't understand reason?" Tuoya rolled her eyes at Yang Qindong and said righteously. After saying this, her face unknowingly turned red, and she quickly lowered her head to hide it. Tuoya admitted that Yang Qindong gave her a good impression. This man was very handsome and so young. If she were to compare who would be a suitable husband, he would be much better than that ugly Hararuo. Of course, she stayed here because she was curious about the black-clad cavalry. She didn't know why, but she had a feeling that even if Lumek brought his troops here, it wouldn't be difficult for this handsome young master. In short, she was infected by Yang Qindong's strong confidence. Yang Qindong was speechless after seeing Tuoya's heroic side. He could only say, "All right, then let's wait a little longer. If the sun is about to set and the enemy doesn't appear, then we'll go our separate ways." After saying this, Yang Qindong took a sip of tea and closed his eyes again. Tuoya, who wasn't chased away, didn't care about this. Since she was able to stay, she used this opportunity to talk non-stop like a machine gun. She selectively told Yang Qindong some of the secrets of the grassland that she knew about. Although it was selective, some things were still kept secret to the outside world. This piqued the interest of the 6th young master, who had originally wanted to close his eyes and take a nap. After a while, the conversation between the two of them became more and more lively, as if they were old friends. Lumake fled in defeat. After running a certain distance, he saw that there were no invincible soldiers chasing after him. He couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. But then his face was filled with anger. He and his 300 cavalry couldn't even defeat the enemy's 100 cavalry. To him, this was absolutely intolerable. As a proud general, of course he wouldn't let this matter pass. He wanted revenge. Let's go. Come with me to find the young master. Lumake whipped his horse and led the defeated cavalry to turn a corner and gallop away. His luck wasn't bad. He originally thought that he would have to run for 2 hours before finding Hararuo. He didn't expect that the young master was worried about Tuoya and had already chased after him with 5,000 cavalry. Hararuo had 5,000 cavalry. Even if they met the Mongolian cavalry of the Gobi Desert, they would be able to protect themselves. After all, neither side wanted a war of this scale. The answer was likely to be a mutual retreat. With this in mind, Hararuo wasn't too surprised when he saw Lumake appear with his defeated army. What's wrong? Did you meet the main force of the Gobi Desert? Young master, I don't know if that's the case. Lumake said gloomily. It didn't matter if they lost the war. As long as they were still alive, they could always learn from the experience and fight again. But what he couldn't accept was that he didn't even know the enemy's background. You don't know? Hararuo's face turned ugly. He wanted to shout out, trash, but when he thought about it, he suppressed his anger and asked, tell me, what's going on? Yes, young master, the situation is like this. Lumake chased after Tuoya, but there was someone else with her. Especially a handsome young man. Then, a group of unknown black cavalry appeared. Hararuo listened silently at first. When he heard that Tuoya was with a young man, his eyes became as deep as water. Although he only liked Tuoya for her beauty and wanted to use the marriage to find a place to develop, Tuoya was already like a piece of meat in his heart. How could he allow another man to taint her? Take me to him, I want to kill him. Hararuo roared. The murderous intent in his eyes was almost tangible. Beside a small stream, under a large umbrella, Yang Qindong drank the last cup of tea. His face was filled with satisfaction and regret. He was satisfied because of the leisure he had for half a day. Usually, when he was in the military camp, he would either read information or look at the sand table. Occasionally, when he had time to rest, he would exercise his body. When had he ever relaxed like today? Although he learned more about the situation when chatting with Princess Tuoya, time always passed quickly when chatting with a beauty. He didn't feel tired. Regretfully, Lumake didn't bring anyone to cause trouble for them. Originally, he wanted to wait for them to come and take the opportunity to obtain more warhorses. Now, it seemed that he wouldn't be able to do as he wished. All right, the tea is finished, and the sun is about to set. I should also go back. Let's meet again, Princess Tuya. Yang Qindong sat up straight and stretched his waist. Beta Persei brought Ba Dao Jiang and his friends over and began to pack up the small table, large umbrella, and blankets. Tuoya pouted and unwillingly got up to put on her shoes. Yang Qindong was about to leave. Lumake hadn't come, so he had no reason to stay here. After all, she was still a girl. She couldn't really stay here. Although the women of the steppe were much more magnanimous than the women of the Central Plains, as unmarried women, there was a limit to what they could do. Yang Qindong didn't know what Tuoya was thinking. But he really didn't want to incur any more emotional debt. Moreover, although Tuoya could be considered pretty, and her position was definitely a lethal weapon, she wasn't the type that would make people lose control of themselves at first sight. At the very least, she was far inferior to Hu Yan's gentleness, Qiao Yin's obedience, and Su Maner's seductive charm. Madame Xue and Madame Xiang also had their own merits. The former courtesan of the capital had many unique skills. Even Wan Xiaoyu, who wasn't even 18 yet, was as understanding as the little sister next door. She looked even more valiant and heroic in her military uniform. It could be said that people couldn't be compared to each other. Yang Qindong didn't mean this. Even though he knew that Tuoya had an extraordinary status, he didn't urge her to stay. How could a man rely on a woman and his pants to establish himself in the world? At this moment, even though he saw Tuoya's unhappy face, Yang Qindong didn't have any intention of changing his mind. He remained silent the entire time, watching Princess Tuoya walk in front of his warhorse with a face full of displeasure and reluctance. Report. Seeing that Tuoya had already lifted one of her feet and was about to get on her horse at any moment, First Guard Captain Xiao Vi appeared in front of him. With a loud shout, he broke the originally peaceful atmosphere. Xiao Vi didn't kneel, only saluting with his body stretched taut. He said, "The scouts report that there's a group of cavalry approaching us from the northwest. There are about 5,000 of them." 5,000 cavalry. A look of shock flashed across Yang Qindong's face. He had thought that Rumak would come for revenge, but he didn't expect so many cavalry. If he had been prepared, with the 15,000 cavalry in his hands, he naturally wouldn't be afraid of 5,000 infantrymen. But the enemy had come too suddenly. He didn't know how many cavalry he could mobilize in such a short time. Chapter 681. His gaze fell on Xiao Vi. Where are the various units? How many of them can we contact? Reporting to the 6th Young Master, the 3 divisions of the Cold Vanguard Division are currently undergoing long-distance training and cannot be contacted for the time being. The Independent Regiment is further away and most of them are infantry. According to the location they reported earlier, they should be about 30 miles away from us. The 1st and 2nd Cavalry Regiments have already sent people to inform them. They are even further away from us, more than 100 miles away. I'm afraid that they will have to wait until dawn to arrive when they receive the news. Now, only the Nuzan Cavalry Regiment and the Logistics Battalion are at the base camp. They will arrive in half an hour. Xiao Vi's body was covered in a layer of cold sweat as he reported. He wouldn't have known if he didn't say anything. After he finished, he realized that the young master's forces were actually so weak. The only force that could really come immediately was the Nuzan Cavalry Regiment. Of course, in his eyes, the Logistics Battalion did not have the slightest bit of combat power. Beta Persei also heard it clearly from the side. He also felt that the situation was a little serious. He took the initiative to say, "Young Master, the Logistics Battalion can also go to the battlefield. No matter what, they have the strength of 1,000 people. Say no more." Yang Qindong waved his hand. Not only would he not let the Logistics Battalion go to the battlefield, he would not even return to the base camp. He did not know what the outcome of this battle would be. Once their main camp was destroyed, the army would have a hard time moving through the grasslands without rations. He could not take the risk. Yang Qindong looked at Xiao Vi and asked, "Is there any terrain nearby that is suitable for the cavalry to fight?" Xiao Vi did not understand what Yang Qindong meant, but since it was the young master who asked, he thought about it carefully and said, "There is a short stone pile about 5 miles away from here. It is densely covered in gravel and is not suitable for a large group of cavalry to fight." 5 miles? Yang Qindong only thought for a short while before the location of the short rocks in the sand table appeared in his mind. He immediately nodded. "Okay, let's choose the battlefield there." At the same time, he sent out all the scouts on hand and asked them to contact the main forces, telling them to quickly approach the pile of short rocks and look for opportunities to fight. Also, inform Commander Yila to bring the Nuzan Cavalry Division to reinforce us. In a very short period of time, Yang Qindong was ready to fight. However, as soon as he finished speaking, Beta Persei said anxiously, "Young Master, the Nuzan Cavalry is not a direct army. If the situation is unclear, I'm afraid they will. They'll betray us, won't they?" Yang Qindong finished for Beta Persei. Then, he sneered and said, "I believe that Yila is not a short-sighted person. If he is, then sooner or later, he will rebel. Isn't it the best of both worlds to use this opportunity to test him? Okay, it's decided. Captain Xiao, you can go and pass down the order. Yang Chendong wouldn't tell anyone that he had the secret of the warehouse. If Yella really wanted to go against him and threaten him together with Lumak, then he wouldn't mind taking out some weapons from the warehouse that would give them a scare. For example, he could casually drive out an armored tank. That was a good thing that could even block bullets. What could those bows and arrows do? At that time, he would kill in all directions. He would turn the pile of short rocks into a pile of bones and a pile of blood. He sighed in his heart. Yila, you better not disappoint me. Otherwise, because of you, I'm afraid that no Nuzin will appear in this world in the future. Yang Chendong pursued the goal of achieving it by hook or by crook. He could give others a chance, but there was only one chance. If you couldn't seize it, then sorry, the next thing would be the power of thunder that would destroy the world. Xiao Vi had followed Yang Chendong for a long time. Naturally, he could see the determination of the sixth young master. After saluting, he turned around and left. On the other side, Princess Tuoya also walked over at this time. What's wrong? Did Lumak come again? Why don't you go northeast? I'm sure that Bao Yin has already told her father about me. There should be people coming to receive us. At that time, no matter how bold Lumak is, he won't dare to act rashly. Tuoya was truly kind. Yang Chendong could feel it. However, as a man, how could he live under the protection of a woman? Besides, war was the reason he came to this place in the first place. Sometimes, as the war continued, there would be fewer and fewer people. When those who were unconvinced became corpses and those who were convinced were still alive, then it would be time to unify this place. Yang Chendong, who wouldn't back down and had no reason to do so, naturally rejected Tuoya's kind intentions. In return, he didn't let her leave this time. Instead, he said in an inviting tone, Rumak is indeed coming. This time, he brought 5,000 cavalrymen with him. Why don't you come with me? It will be safer that way. Since the enemy cavalry was coming, they would definitely send out light cavalry scouts. Once they found out that Tuoya was alone, there was no telling what would happen. As a man, he naturally had the responsibility to protect a woman. Not to mention, she wanted to help him out of kindness. Me? Tuoya pointed at herself and said in disbelief, You allow me to follow you? Yes, for your safety. It should be now. Rumak's cavalry scouts should have surrounded us. It is too dangerous for you to leave now. Yang Chendong said seriously, trying to be as emotionless as possible. However, when Tuoya heard this, she was still touched. See, he is still worried about me. Although she couldn't say that she liked Yang Chendong, she didn't know why, but at this moment, her heart was filled with joy and joy. Things were just as Yang Chendong expected. Rumak's cavalry scouts had indeed locked onto the stream. When the first and second squad walked towards the pile of short rocks, they followed from a distance. These scouts didn't have any intention of attacking. Even when they saw the cavalrymen galloping past them, they didn't make any moves to stop them. Scouts were scouts. Their responsibility was to gather information and lock onto targets. As for the rest, it was naturally left to the combat troops. The pile of short rocks, as its name suggested, was made up of piles of broken rocks. Even after many months, it didn't seem to be very high. The highest point was only about 3 meters high. It didn't give them any advantage of looking down from a high vantage point. Fortunately, Yang Chendong didn't want to look for a high vantage point. He was satisfied as long as there was a place where he could stand and see further. The highest point of the pile of short rocks just happened to meet his requirements. Riding the white dragon horse, Yang Chendong slowly ascended and came to the top of the pile of short stones. Everywhere he looked, there were piles of stones one after another. They were scattered in all directions, dividing the area in front of him into dozens of pieces. This was the place where Yang Chendong asked for a small-scale cavalry battle. Xiao Vi had already said that the information from the scouting camp was that the enemy had about 5,000 cavalry. If that was the case, if they were to find an open space, the enemy would be able to kill them in a single charge. there wouldn't be much room to maneuver. Young master, are we going to stay here for a while? Beta Persei saw Yang Chendong stop on his white dragon horse and guessed something. That's right. This young master will stay here for a while. Come, put the flag here. From today onwards, the name of the 5-star army will be known throughout the grasslands. Yang Chendong said with a heroic tone, then pointed to an open space beside him. Hearing this, Beta Persei called for the guard team to take out a bright 5-star flag and put it beside Yang Chendong. The red flag immediately fluttered in the wind, showing off its charm. All the guard team members wore black armor with iron masks and wore Kevlar helmets that didn't fit in to protect the important parts of their heads. Yang Chendong also covered his white dragon horse with a layer of iron armor and changed into the same outfit as the other guard team members. When they stood under the 5-star flag like this, a powerful aura was unknowingly born. It made Princess Tuoya, who was watching all this curiously from the side, feel like she was about to meet the Great Khan. Just as the preparations were in place, a cloud of dust rose from the south of the pile of short rocks, making it impossible to see who was coming and how many people there were. Out of instinct, Tuoya asked with some apprehension, "Is it the cavalry brought by Rumak?" Looking in the direction, Yang Chendong shook his head with a smile. "It shouldn't be them, it's our cavalry." "Your cavalry?" Tuoya was a little surprised after saying this. She was more and more unable to understand the origin of this Yang Dong. She was certain that this was the first time she saw the 5-star flag in front of her. But this curiosity was quickly suppressed. Right in front of them, another cavalry team loomed in the distance. Tuoya, who was riding beside Yang Chendong, had a solemn expression on her face. Although Yang Chendong had already surprised her, the number of cavalry that Rumak brought was obviously too much. Even if there were more than 100 black cavalry, could they turn the situation around? If Yang Chendong was defeated by Rumak, as a fellow traveler, she wouldn't have an easy time either. Thinking of this, Tuoya's gaze looked towards the northeast, but there was still no movement there. It made sense when she thought about it. Bao Yin had only left for a short period of time. Her father still needed to gather the cavalry when he received the news. It was impossible for him to rush over so quickly. What was different from Tuoya was that Yang Chendong's expression was normal. He didn't show any fluctuations in his emotions from beginning to end. Until the first cavalry team appeared, a rider jumped out and arrived under the pile of rocks. Nuzan cavalry team leader Yi Wei greets the 6th young master. Chapter 682. Yi La did not kneel as he was not used to saluting. Instead, he placed his right hand in front of his chest and made a salute similar to the Mongols. "Yi La, you only have 3,000 men. This time, your opponent has 5,000 cavalry. Do you have the confidence to fight? Do you have the confidence to win?" Yang Chendong's bright eyes stared at Yi La. "6th young master, don't worry. Our Nizan cavalry will fight to the last moment and do our best." Yi La's expression was firm, as if saying, "Just wait and see what we'll do." "Good. Then I will wait for your excellent performance," Yang Chendong said in a heroic voice. In his eyes, there was no trace of worry. He also did not say anything to boost morale. It was as though the Nuzan cavalry was his direct subordinates and there was no need to doubt him. Yi La originally thought that Yang Chendong would say something to boost morale. At the very least, he should give him some assurance. However, he did not say anything. This made him feel that he was trusted. Yes, he was trusted. When facing a true subordinate, there was no need for any promises. They would do their best. Seeing that Yang Chendong had nothing else to say, Yi La turned around and mounted his horse to return to the troops. He looked at Lu Dai and the 3,000 cavalrymen and said loudly, "Brothers, it's time for us to perform. The 6th young master is looking at us from behind. Our parents and wives in our hometown are also waiting for us to perform meritorious deeds. Right now, we only need to do our best to destroy the enemy cavalry and give them a better life. Is everyone confident? Kill the enemy and perform meritorious deeds." Kill the enemy and perform meritorious deeds. The 3,000 Nuzan cavalry below all shouted excitedly. Very good. Divide the cavalry according to the plan. Spread out according to the different terrains. Use the Nuzan's unique guerrilla tactics and a 3-to-3 attack formation. Yi La, who had shouted, announced the battle order coolly. Yi La was very confident in these elite Nuzan cavalry. As long as they performed well, what was there to be afraid of even if there were more than 5,000 cavalry? The 3,000 Nuzan cavalrymen that had just gathered dispersed and each of them searched for a suitable battlefield. Atop the pile of rocks, Tuoya said worriedly, "Young Master Yang, you only have 3,000 cavalry while the other side has 5,000, can you win?" "Definitely." Yang Chendong's firm voice came out from his mouth. His eyes were indifferent as he stood there like a god descending to the mortal world, like a towering mountain. The Nuzan cavalry was making all sorts of preparations before the battle. In the distance, Halaruaku and Rumyuk were approaching with their 5,000 cavalrymen. According to the cavalry scouts under his command, Haliruo already knew that the strength of the enemy this time was not weak. They actually had 3,000 cavalrymen. Of course, although they weren't weak, he still didn't put them in his eyes. He had brought the Walla cavalry that he thought was the most powerful. Back then, Sha Ming's army was like cutting chickens and vegetables. They had won more than once. Not to mention, now that they had the advantage in numbers, there was even less chance of defeat. "Rumyuk, your chance to show off has come. I've taken a fancy to these horses and slaves, do you understand?" Haliruo's eyes revealed a trace of ruthlessness as he spoke. "Young master, don't worry." Rumyuk patted his chest and promised. His thoughts were the same as Haliruo's. His limited vision made him believe that the Walla cavalry was the strongest in the world. As for the previous loss to the 100 or so black cavalry, that was only because the enemy's equipment was too good. That was a special case. "Cavalrymen, attack with me." Taking out the saber at his waist, he leaned forward and waved it. Under Rumyuk's loud roar, the 5,000 cavalrymen behind him moved. Like dumplings being dropped into a pot, the cavalrymen charged forward one after another. Tens of thousands of horses galloped forward, their shouts shaking the sky. Under the dry weather, bursts of smoke and dust rose up. From afar, it looked like a huge sandstorm that wanted to swallow everything. In terms of momentum, the Walla cavalry's performance was still very good. However, because of the terrain, the warhorses were unable to gallop on the sharp stones. The originally huge flood had no choice but to split up in the middle and charge towards the small battlefields that the Nuzan cavalry had set up. If it was in a wide area, the cavalry would compete in momentum. The morale of the troops, the number of soldiers, and the bravery of the soldiers would all play a decisive role. Once one side's formation was disrupted and broken, it often meant that the balance of the battle was tipping. It often meant that the battle was about to end. Yang Chendong used the terrain in advance to suppress the Walla cavalry's advantage in numbers. This competition was based on the morale, courage, and martial arts of both sides. Yang Chendong was extremely confident in all of these. He had spent a lot of effort to subdue the Nuzan cavalry. He firmly believed that this time, they would be able to deliver a perfect result. No one knew better than him how the future Nuzan cavalry became slaves and how they replaced the Ming dynasty to establish a new dynasty. In addition, these Nuzan cavalry were equipped with the sharpest sabers. There was no way they would lose. There was no reason for them to lose. The smoke and dust in the sky greatly affected the effect of watching the battle. When the two sides fought, both Yang Chendong and Hararuo could not see the situation on the battlefield. However, the two of them were not in a hurry. They seemed to be full of confidence in their cavalry. They even firmly believed that the moment the battle ended, the winner would be them. Compared to the calmness of these two people, Tuoya looked as if she had lost her soul. If the Khan sent reinforcements, they would only appear there. But when would they arrive? On the battlefield, the smoke and dust in the sky also affected the knights on both sides. Fortunately, this was not the first time they had fought on the battlefield. As veterans, they knew that being impatient would not solve any problems. Only by believing in the sabers in their hands, believing in the warhorses under them, and killing more enemies would they be able to obtain the final victory. One of the Walla cavalry lost contact with his comrades because of the obstruction, but he did not panic. Instead, he held the saber in his hand and carefully sensed everything around him. While continuing to find his comrades, he was also on guard against the sudden appearance of enemies. Suddenly, there was movement on the right side of his body. Out of instinct, the Walla cavalry raised the saber in his hand. The moment he saw that the other person was not his comrade, he quickly lowered the saber in his hand. Under the powerful force, the saber collided with the saber on the opposite side. Dang! With a crisp but powerful collision, the two of them paused at the same time, and then separated immediately upon contact. Both sides were prepared for this strike, and no one was able to gain any advantage. The two figures crossed each other, turned around, and slashed out again. It was almost the same tactic, the same posture, and the two sabers collided again. Then one of the sabers suddenly broke from the middle. The broken weapon was naturally the saber in the hands of the Vara cavalry. If it was not for the huge impact, perhaps his saber could have held on for a while. But when both sides used their full strength, after two clashes, the advantage of weapons was highlighted. The saber actually broke from the middle, and cold sweat instantly emerged from the body of the Walla cavalryman. Although it was June and the weather was very hot, he did not know why he was sweating all over. He did not know why. But since the saber in his hand broke from the middle, the next thing to do was to escape. Otherwise, if both sides swung their sabers, one saber could not reach the enemy's saber, but the enemy's saber could cut him. How could he fight this battle? Fortunately, when the saber hit the second time, the two sides were already facing each other, so it was naturally the best time to escape. The Walla cavalry pressed his legs and urged his horse to rush forward. He did not dare to turn back and fight the Nuzan cavalry head-on. The Vara cavalryman was still lamenting his good luck that he wasn't killed by the enemy due to the disadvantage of his saber. Suddenly, another cavalryman rushed out of the smoke. It was another Nuzan cavalryman. Out of instinct and habit, the cavalryman slashed forward with his saber. However, he had forgotten that the saber in his hand had already been broken in half. Not only did his saber not hit his opponent, it was his opponent's saber that landed on his chest instead. Blood splattered, and a warm stream splashed on his face. While the Walla cavalry felt these changes, the strength in his body was quickly drained at this moment. He wanted to say something, for example, if it were not for the broken saber, he would not have died. But now, his chest was split open, and his bones and organs were exposed. No matter how he opened his mouth, he could not make a sound. Plop. With no strength left, the Walla cavalry finally fell from the horse. He looked at the sky with his eyes wide open. Perhaps this moment was a relief for him. This was just one of the many places on the battlefield. In fact, the same scene was happening all the time. Not long after the battle, countless Walla cavalry died because of the broken saber. They may be good at fighting, or they may be good at riding. But how could they defeat the equally powerful Nuzan cavalry with their bare hands? One by one, the Walla cavalrymen were hacked to death and fell from their warhorses, causing a cloud of dust to fly into the air. Outside the battlefield, Haru did not know that the scales of victory had tilted to the other side. He was still dreaming of the victory. Chapter 683. Due to their position being higher than the ground, Yang Chendong, Tuoya, and the five-starred flag beside them were still clear and dazzling. All of this fell into the eyes of Halarua, and he couldn't help but reveal a trace of hatred. A man couldn't tolerate the hatred of killing his father and stealing his wife. Although Tuoya wasn't his woman yet, and she hadn't even acknowledged it, Haliruo had long considered her as his woman. Since she was his woman, he could give her away, but he definitely wouldn't allow her to act on her own. Seeing her riding on a horse beside a handsome young man, glancing left and right, and even saying something from time to time, Hararuo was burning with jealousy. He stretched out his hand and pointed forward. Go, send someone up there and kill that man. Snatch that woman for me. Since it was the first battle, Lumek didn't send out all of his cavalry. The enemy only had 3,000 cavalry. He only needed to send out 3,000 cavalry to clinch the victory. As such, he still had 2,000 cavalrymen by his side. Once the young master gave the order, Lumek immediately complied. He pointed at 2 centurions and said, "You two, take the men from our main force and capture the person on the short rock. Remember, the man can die, but the woman must be brought back alive." "Yes." The 2 centurions who were called out replied proudly. 200 men chasing after a few people, in their opinion, General Lump was being too cautious. Of course, they didn't know about the existence of the black cavalry. Otherwise, they wouldn't have thought of courting death. Yes, these 200 Walla cavalry were courting death. Only 200 people dared to have designs on Yang Chendong. Not to mention him personally taking action, just the 100 over black knights by his side would be enough to make them doubt their lives. The 2 groups of 200 cavalry didn't charge into the battlefield. Instead, they took a detour to the pile of rocks. With the speed of their warhorses, they arrived at the left and right sides of the pile of rocks in less than an incense's time. The 200 cavalry approached with smiles on their faces. "Release the arrows." Just when they thought they could reel in their prey, a wave of arrows pierced through the air. Over 100 arrows suddenly appeared from 2 different directions, flying towards the Walla cavalry that was still filled with anticipation. Clang! Caught off guard, the Walla cavalry took out their shields or made all kinds of difficult dodging movements. The arrows flew past them. Most of them dodged, and only a few were hit. However, they weren't in critical positions and didn't threaten their lives. Although the arrows didn't kill anyone, they effectively stopped the Walla cavalry's charge. Just when they were cursing and saying that it wasn't a gentleman's action, a large group of cavalry in black armor suddenly appeared on the 2 sides of the pile of rocks. Not only were they wrapped in black armor, but they also had black masks on their faces. Even the warhorses under them were equipped with iron armor. They were armed to the teeth. Looking at the cavalry in black with a green helmet, the 200 cavalrymen couldn't help but be startled. This was the first time they had seen such an enemy. Silence, no sound, only the sound of the horses' hooves moving forward. The sound was like a drum that smashed into the hearts of every Walla cavalry, and the horror on their faces became more and more intense. At this time, the rhythm of the battlefield was completely taken over by the black cavalry. The hard training of the guards was effective at this time. The silent battle cry spread out endless murderous aura and shrouded the 200 Walla cavalry. Gulp. A centurion of the Walla unconsciously swallowed a mouthful of saliva, then nervously wiped the sweat dripping from his forehead, and said in a trembling voice, "Fight with me." Only the heavens knew how much effort it took for him to say those words. Fortunately, he still managed to say them in the end. He didn't know why, but after saying this, he felt his mind relax, as if he had just completed a very difficult task. The other Walla cavalry also let out a sigh of relief at this moment. Then one by one, they gathered their courage, raised their sabers, and reappeared with the murderous aura from before. The 100 black cavalry were already ready at this moment. Almost at the same time when the order to fight with me sounded, they spurred their horses forward and charged towards the 200 Walla cavalry. The sharp saber was raised high, and then, with an unstoppable momentum, it fell from the sky and chopped down on the bodies of the Walla cavalry that were charging towards them. The Black Knights did not need to defend and only needed to attack. They swung their sabers at the bodies of the Walla cavalrymen, allowing the other party to slash at their bodies, turning a deaf ear to it. The 2 sides crossed each other, but there was no sound of sabers clashing like usual. There was only the sound of sabers slashing on the black armor, and the sound of sabers slashing on the body. After passing by each other, the 2 sides turned back and faced each other again. In the process, one by one, the Walla cavalry fell from their horses. The sabers were so sharp that some of the Walla cavalry had already been cut off by the sabers, but the blood didn't have time to flow out, and they still had the opportunity to turn their horses around. However, death was death. Half of the 200 cavalrymen had died in battle just because they made one extra move. They originally looked like they had the advantage in numbers, but at this moment, they were reduced by a lot. This scene made the surviving Walla cavalry tremble uncontrollably. There was no lack of desperados among them, and they were not afraid of death. But the way they died was still too strange. It was so strange that it made them feel cold, and they were at a loss of what to do, and they couldn't see any hope. There was still no sound, and the hundreds of black cavalry launched a second charge as if they had discussed it beforehand. Facing the oncoming black cavalry, there was no change in their expressions. The Walla cavalry was no longer as arrogant as before. On the contrary, a few of the more timid ones turned around and fled. They could see that there was no chance of winning against such an opponent. If they continued to stay, they would only be courting death. The Walla cavalry that turned around and fled was like a plague, and when it spread to the other Walla cavalry, they also turned their horses around and wanted to leave. It was just a head-on confrontation, but the morale of the opposing army was completely disintegrated at this moment. It had to be said that the black cavalry was too strong. In the face of the black cavalry's charge, the Walla cavalry that was one step behind had no way to escape. Those that were too slow were caught up and killed, and those that were too fast were shot through by the black cavalry's arrows. They fell on the road of escape. The 200 cavalrymen came with an aggressive aura, but when they really fought, they couldn't even withstand a single blow. They didn't even last for half an incense stick's worth of time before they were completely annihilated. In the distance, Hilario and Rumyuk, who were watching this scene closely, had their eyes wide open. The short rock pile was slightly higher than the ground, and everything that happened there was clearly reflected in everyone's eyes. It was only then that everyone was shocked. What? What is that? When did such a powerful cavalry appear in the grasslands? After a while, Hilario digested what he saw. His gaze fell on Rumyuk, and his questioning gaze was very obvious. I don't know. Rumyuk shook his head. They are the black cavalry I mentioned before. It seems that if we want to deal with them, we won't be able to outnumber them. Compared to the others, Rumyuk wasn't the most surprised. He had already seen the enemy's strength. However, the efficiency with which the Black Knights had killed the man had exceeded his expectations. That's right. With this reminder, Hilario wasn't angry. Instead, he was happy. These black cavalry have almost no openings, but wearing such heavy armor is bound to consume a lot of energy. As long as we can delay them, we can win through attrition. At that time, the armor will be ours. The more Hilario spoke, the more excited he became. Without waiting for Rumyuk to give any orders, he turned around and called out several names. The few of you, take 1,000 cavalry with you. Remember, these black cavalry's heavy armor is impenetrable. As long as you continue to exhaust their strength, you will definitely be able to defeat them. After witnessing the scene just now, no one wanted to face the black cavalry. However, this was an order from Hilario, and no one dared to disobey. The centurions who were called out could only grimace and agree. Soon after, they split up into several groups and charged toward the pile of short rocks. On the pile of rocks, the black cavalry's performance was so outstanding, and they were so close to the enemy that it was an eye-opener for Tuoya. Hey, young Master Yang, these black cavalry subordinates of yours are really too powerful. How about we make a deal? If you sell these black cavalry to us, I will definitely ask Father to give you a satisfactory price. Buy armor? I don't lack money. Yang Chendong shook his head and smiled. What kind of joke was this? When it came to earning money, who could compare to the Beyond Heaven Trading Company? Meanwhile, the owner behind the scenes of this trading company was himself. Everything that was sold there was made by Crimson City under his guidance. Comparing the amount of silver and the speed at which he earned money, he did not fear anyone. Don't be so quick to refuse, we're really sincere. Tuoya had become accustomed to Yang Chendong's arrogance. This person seemed to be unmoved in the face of any kind of temptation, but it was this kind of performance that had a unique charm that Tuoya liked very much. Chapter 684. Let's talk about it later. Yang Chendong didn't want to argue with Tuoya on this issue, so he tried to stall for time. Then, he looked at the main battlefield. Although he couldn't see the situation clearly due to the dust, he had confidence in the Nuzan cavalry. When he thought of the phrase, Nuzan are invincible with a full sword, he was full of confidence. Although the 1,000 Walla cavalry were unwilling, they had no choice but to come to the pile of rocks. When they faced the black cavalry at such a close distance, an indescribable murderous aura surged towards them, causing the Walla cavalry to involuntarily stop in their tracks. Everyone, attack together. Don't fight them head-on. Use guerrilla tactics to exhaust their stamina. The centurion in the lead instructed his subordinates. Then, he carefully rode his horse forward and formed an encirclement around the black cavalry guards. The cavalry maintained a certain distance between each other. This way, if they encountered any danger, they could quickly turn around and leave. The encirclement was formed, but every time the guards moved forward, the enemy in front of them would retreat. They simply did not want to fight them head-on. The tactic of stalling was perfectly demonstrated by the Vola cavalry. When they were forging the black armor and warhorse chainmail, Wuwa had said that although they had raised the quality of the armor to the highest level, armor was still armor and still had some weight. When two armies fought, it might not be obvious in a short period of time. However, if the battle dragged on, the problem would naturally be exposed. Wuwa only had the ability to forge armor. He didn't have any way to deal with the problems and things that might happen on the battlefield. Regarding this, Yang Chendong didn't insist. Instead, he called Xiao Vi and Dao Shao over and told them how to solve the problem. 1. Alternate resting. This meant that if the enemy was too far away and wanted to use a war of attrition to deal with them, then half of the members would rest and the other half would be on guard. This way, they would have enough energy and stamina to kill the enemy on the battlefield. 2. Attack with arrows. If the enemy was too close and wanted to exhaust them by surrounding them, then use arrows to counterattack and cause chaos in the enemy's formation, forcing them to flee. 3. Musket fire. If the enemy's encirclement was set up far away, about 1 li away, then they would not be able to rest at ease, and if the range of the arrows was too far, then they would use their muskets to counterattack, killing the enemy when they least expect it and killing the enemy when they are helpless. To sum it up, the safety of the team members was their top priority. As for whether the appearance of the flintlock would allow others to guess their identities, they couldn't do so much in a situation where their lives were threatened. Yang Chendong's plan was very comprehensive, taking into account the distance and any possible situation. Therefore, when they saw that the other party was only surrounding them without attacking, no matter if it was Cho Wu, Dao Shao, or the other guards, they did not feel frustrated at all. Instead, they followed the plan and took out their bows and arrows, launching a fierce counterattack. The Walla cavalry was less than 100 meters away from the black cavalry, which was the best range for arrows. When arrows were taken out from the quiver, they pierced through the air and greeted the Walla cavalry, and a one-sided massacre began. At such a close distance, and with the strict archery training, the black cavalry could not say that they were always accurate, but at least 30% of their arrows hit their opponents. This was because the Walla cavalry only needed to dodge and did not need to think about attacking. Otherwise, this accuracy would have been even higher. As for the Walla cavalry, when faced with the arrows of the Black Knights at close range, there would always be someone who would be hit by the arrows one after another. Some of them would be killed by the arrows and fall from their horses. If they were injured, they would lie on their horses and lose their ability to fight. The feeling of being a live target was naturally not good. The Vola cavalrymen also began to retaliate with their bows and arrows. Unfortunately, their arrows were very accurate, but regardless of whether they hit a person or a horse, they only left a white mark before falling back to the ground. They didn't cause any damage at all. This was not an exchange of arrows, it was a massacre. With no choice, the Walla cavalry could only retreat and get out of the effective range of the arrows. Charge! Captain Xiao Vi of the Black Cavalry seized this opportunity. When the Walla cavalry formation was in chaos and retreated, he suddenly launched a counterattack and caught the Walla cavalry off guard. In the process, hundreds of knights died under the sharp sabers of the Black Cavalry. The initiative was completely in the hands of the Black Cavalry. Although the Walla Cavalry had the advantage in numbers, it was difficult for them to say anything. They could only follow from afar and did not dare to get closer. Taking advantage of the gap, half of the Black Cavalry jumped off their horses to reduce the weight of their comrades and try to recover as much energy as possible. In the eyes of the Walla Cavalry, this action of the Black Cavalry was seen as an opportunity, and they took the opportunity to launch 2 attacks. However, because the distance was too far, the Black Cavalry had enough time to jump on their horses and get into a defensive position. Not only that, they took advantage of the fact that their opponents could not immediately move away and launched 2 counterattacks, killing hundreds of their opponents. After 2 attacks and many corpses, the Walla Cavalry became smarter. They only surrounded the Black Cavalry from afar and allowed them to rest. They did not take another step forward. Halirua watched helplessly as the cavalry he sent out was unable to do anything to the Black Knights. He wanted to scold these people for being cowards, but considering that they had already lost more than 40% of their men, continuing to fight would only bring disgrace upon themselves. Thus, he gave up on ordering the cavalry to continue attacking. Instead, he set his sights on the main battlefield. In his mind, as long as he achieved victory on the main battlefield, he would be able to use the advantage of numbers to charge towards the pile of rocks. At that time, the hundreds of Black Knights would definitely be in his hands. The sun had already set and the sky was gradually turning dark. The dust on the main battlefield did not fly as high as it did at the beginning. The dust did not rise, which meant that the main battlefield had already reached a conclusion. At this moment, both Yang Chendong and Har were doing their best to keep an eye on the battlefield. Victory or defeat on the main battlefield was very likely to affect the victory or defeat of the other side. Follow me and kill. Just as everyone was looking at the main battlefield expectantly and waiting for the result, a cavalry suddenly appeared from the south side of the battlefield. Because of the darkness, it was impossible to see how many people there were. However, judging from the battle cries, it was not a small number. Are these the enemy's reinforcements? Har stood on his horse and listened attentively. His expression was not good. He relied on the strength and numbers of the Walla cavalry. He did not know the result of the battle, but his advantage in numbers was getting smaller and smaller. I don't know. Lumak shook his head. He really did not know who these people were. Speaking of which, this was the first time he had seen Yang Chendong. It was also the first time he had heard of the 5-star army. In the past, the 5-star army had come to the grasslands, but they had only come in a hurry and left in a hurry. When Windchaser discovered that his forces were not enough to face any opponents on the grasslands, he tactfully retreated and stayed in the new Gandusi region to recruit soldiers. As a result, the name of the 5-star army was rarely known on the grasslands. Lumak's reply made Har feel a bit disappointed. However, since the enemy's reinforcements had appeared, he could not ignore them. Go. I'll give you 500 people. Go and stop them. Before victory or defeat is decided on the main battlefield, you absolutely cannot let these people charge in. Har originally had 2,000 people by his side. Just the short stone pile alone sent out 1,200 people. Right now, he only had 800 people. Giving Lumak 500 people was already the most he could do. Yes. Lumak cupped his fists and replied, appearing full of confidence. In reality, leading Walla's elite cavalry, he also had this kind of confidence. As long as it wasn't an impenetrable existence like the Black Cavalry, even if the enemy's military strength was greater than his, he really did not need to fear anyone. Lumak was extremely confident, but he did not know who his opponent was this time. Because the sky had already darkened, even Yang Chendong on the short stone pile did not know who the first batch of reinforcements were. Tiger's Mane, publicly recognized as the person closest to Yang Chendong, as well as the person who followed the 6th young master the earliest, became the first batch of reinforcements to arrive. Ever since Yang Chendong appointed him as the commander of the independent regiment, Tiger's Mane had put all of his energy into it. 10 infantry battalions, 6 cavalry battalions. Just as the personnel were formed, they were fiercely trained by him. The soldiers of the independent battalion were made up of 6 auxiliary battalions and 4,000 Ming soldiers, and these 4,000 Ming soldiers were all captives. Wanting to lead such an army and have enough fighting strength was not an easy thing to do. Even if it was handed over to the 3rd Division Commander Wu Sheng and Political Commissar Chen Bo, it would take a period of time to form a fighting force. But the same thing happened to Tiger's Mane. He was the confidant of the 6th young master, and his superiority was reflected. Relying on his iron relationship with the logistics battalion commander Beta Persei, he took out large amounts of silver, meat, cigarettes, wine and other things, and distributed them as rewards to the soldiers below. Cigarettes, the first thing that appeared in this world, actually became the favorite of the soldiers in a very short period of time. It was as if they smoked when they were free, or after eating and drinking. It was very satisfying, like they were immortals. Not to mention, silver, wine and meat were freely provided. Under the stimulation of these things, the captives of the Ming army revealed the fierce side in their bones. In order to obtain more rewards, everyone held back their energy and worked hard to perform in the training field. Under the competition, the fighting strength of the independent regiment was rapidly increasing. Chapter 685. Tiger's Mane was overjoyed when he saw the changes in his army. He was waiting for the battle to start so that he could show off to his brothers and the 6th young master that he was also a talented soldier. Just as he was thinking about when the battle would start, a scout reported that the 6th young master was about to fight with a group of 5,000 Walla cavalry at the Stony region. On his side, there were only 3,000 cavalrymen from the Nuzan cavalry division. When Tiger's Mane heard the news, he was both excited and nervous. He was excited because his chance to show off had come. He was also nervous because he was worried about the loyalty of the Nuzan cavalry division. If they were to change sides on the battlefield, the young master only had 2 guards with him. That was only 100 people. How could he protect him? Worried about the 6th young master's safety, Tiger's Mane immediately ordered the 6 cavalry divisions to follow him to protect the 6th young master. As for the 10 infantry divisions, they immediately ran forward. Before they left, Tiger's Mane didn't forget to provoke his soldiers. Listen up, you will never fail when you follow the 6th young master in battle. This time, the enemy has 5,000 cavalrymen. If you do well, you can turn from infantry to cavalry. Of course, in a battle like this, we can't care so much. No one knows if we will be able to get that many horses. For the sake of fairness, we can only rely on first come first serve. Those who arrive first will get a horse, those who arrive later will get nothing. Let's go. Charge. After everyone understood Tiger Edge's meaning, the 10 battalions began a mad race. It was as if they were afraid that they wouldn't be able to get a warhorse if they were late. Everyone ran with big strides, as if they were afraid that they wouldn't be able to get a warhorse. As for Tiger's Mane, he had already led the 6 cavalry battalions and was the first to arrive on the battlefield. Once they entered the battlefield, the sky was getting dark. Tiger's Mane didn't have time to analyze the situation. But from the looks of it, the young master's safety should be guaranteed. Since that was the case, he would kill the enemy first. The more enemies he killed, the more his side would gain victory. Coincidentally, Tiger's Mane was still thinking about how to find an opponent when Lumak appeared with 500 Walla cavalry. The uniforms of the 2 sides were completely different. With just a glance, Tiger's Mane could determine that the other party was an enemy. In addition, Lumak was charging towards him with his saber. It was clear whether he was a friend or a foe. Come on, let's kill together. Kill one and you get 10 cigarettes, half a caddy of wine, 10 taels of silver, and half a caddy of fatty meat. Kill. With a loud shout, Tiger's Mane announced the bets one by one. Then, he leaped into the air and charged at Lumak. With great rewards, there will be brave men. Under the stimulation of such material rewards, the 6 cavalry battalion's eyes turned red. They all rushed forward, giving the impression that if they were late by 1 step, there would be no one to kill and they wouldn't be able to get anything good. They charged towards the battlefield like wild beasts. Tiger's mane, who was wearing a black cape, was like the tip of an arrow. He was the first to arrive in front of the Walla army cavalry. With a wave of his saber, he met his opponent head-on. Ding! After a crisp and clear sound of collision, the two figures passed by each other. The Walla cavalry's warhorse swayed. It was obvious that they were knocked back by the force of the collision. Feeling the pain from his arm, the Walla cavalry soldier's eyes flashed with extreme shock. This person was Lumak. He had also taken the lead and wanted to win with one strike. He never thought that the strength he was so proud of would be at a disadvantage in the first clash. Who is that person? The thought only appeared in his mind. Before he could analyze it, more cavalry soldiers appeared in front of him. They were the independent cavalry soldiers that followed Tiger's mane. When they saw Lumak appear in front of them, they all rushed to kill him. They ignored the general's armor on Lumak. At this moment, this person was meat on their plate. They only thought about how to eat him. Ding ding dang dang. In a short period of time, Lumak continuously exchanged blows with more than 10 independent cavalry soldiers. The saber in his hand finally broke into two. Even though he was a general and the quality of his saber was not bad, under continuous collisions and in front of an even sharper saber, it was not easy to hold on for so long. When the saber broke, a layer of cold sweat appeared on Lumak's head. The doubts in his heart grew. Who were these people? Why were their morale so high? They were all attacking fiercely without any regard for their lives. Why were the sabers in their hands so hard? It was fine if it was just one person, but it seemed like everyone was holding a saber of the same strength. What kind of opponent was this? Why had he never heard of them before? Lumak's heart chilled. He threw away the broken saber in his hand and took out a brand new one. He turned around and attacked. He was indeed afraid of being killed. When he turned around, he wanted to retreat with his brothers and then inform Haruo of the news. There was no way to win this battle. After turning around, Lumak relied on his good martial arts and skillful horse riding skills to dodge the attacks of the independent cavalry soldiers again and again. But the more he did this, the more frightened he was. This was because he realized that from the time he turned around until now, he did not see a single one of his subordinates. Could it be that they were all killed? Or had they escaped? Impossible. How long has it been? His subordinates are all experienced elites. They can't all be killed. They must have escaped. He thought firmly in his heart, or rather, he comforted himself. Finally, Lumak discovered an extremely serious problem. He was completely surrounded. There were enemies everywhere, and he couldn't escape. Whether Lumak was willing to believe it or not, the 500 cavalry soldiers he brought with him were all killed by the independent cavalry soldiers. They originally had the advantage of numbers. 2,000 against 500. In addition, under the stimulation of the tiger's mane, the morale of the soldiers was at its peak. Everyone wanted to achieve military merits. Everyone used all their strength. Under such momentum, the 500 Walla cavalry soldiers were like small boats in the sea. They were quickly swallowed up. Even so, there were still many independent cavalry soldiers who did not have the chance to kill anyone. Thinking that so many military merits and rewards were about to leave them, they all cursed angrily. Who the F***ck is so fast? So cheap. Will it kill you to leave me an opponent? Who said it wasn't? In the blink of an eye, there is no living opponent. Even if you want to snatch military merits, you don't have to be so fast. I still want to eat meat, drink wine, and smoke. Hey, there is still one alive here. Haha, no one fight with me. This is mine. Bullshit, I've had my eyes on him for a long time. This person's life is mine. No. It's mine. It belongs to whoever kills him. Go. Battle cries and angry shouts rose and fell one after another. When Rumk heard these voices, he was shocked and started to hate himself. Why did he only know Chinese? If he didn't, he wouldn't be so shocked. Rumk thought to himself, why did I know Chinese? If I didn't, I wouldn't be so shocked. Of course, now was not the time to think about this. The most important thing was how to face hundreds and thousands of cavalry soldiers. However, was it possible for him to fight against 100 or even 1,000 people by himself? On the main battlefield, the smoke and dust became smaller and smaller. Finally, when the sky was completely dark, the dust on the battlefield dispersed, and the result of the battle was finally revealed. The ground was littered with corpses and lonely warhorses. A night breeze blew past, bringing with it the smell of blood. 3,000 against 3,000. After more than 2 hours of life and death battle, less than half of the 6,000 people were left. However, upon closer inspection, these half of them were dressed in the same uniform. Their fatigued but excited bodies were wrapped in green battle suits. They were the warriors of the Nuzhan Cavalry Division. After a bloody battle of 3,000 people, the remaining 2,500 people were all members of the Nuzhan Cavalry Regiment. Although many of them were injured, they were still standing on their horses, which proved that they were the victors. After experiencing such a bloody battle, as long as their bodies recovered, there would be an additional layer of iron-blooded aura around them. After experiencing a life and death battle, they would also have some personal insights. They would have more skills to survive and a chance to survive in the future battle. We won. Yi La looked left and right. Although his vision was limited due to the darkness, he still couldn't help but shout out in excitement when he saw that all he could see were his own people. Following this shout, there were more responses from the surrounding people. We won, we won. Standing on a pile of rocks, Yang Chendong saw this scene and couldn't help but relax, a hint of a smile on his lips. Although this situation was within his expectations, the loss of less than 500 people in exchange for the loss of 3,000 cavalry was still delightful. We really won. Your soldiers are this strong? Tuoya's beautiful eyes widened once more, and when she looked at Yang Chendong, there were a few stars in her eyes. Although Yang Chendong did not make a move in this battle, his identity as the commander had been confirmed without a doubt. To possess such strength at such a young age, it was not an exaggeration to call him a hero. Every girl had a dream of becoming a hero. At this moment, Yang Chendong, who was already very handsome, had an even higher image in Tuoya's heart. Hilaruo's face was ashen. He had never expected such a result and could not accept it. The Vala cavalry had always been synonymous with the elite cavalry in the past few years. When facing the great Ming and Tatar cavalry, they were not afraid, so how could they be defeated today? Chapter 686. Young Master, General Lumek's army has been completely annihilated, and the general has also died in battle. We should withdraw. A guard rode up to Hilaruo and spoke in an urgent voice. He didn't directly say that they had lost and only said to withdraw. This was already giving Hilaruo a lot of face. Although the young master couldn't figure out the reason, his desire to live still prevailed. Okay, we'll withdraw now. Withdraw. Young master, should we inform the others to retreat as well? Another bodyguard seemed to have suddenly thought of something as he asked. No need. Let them stay and block the enemy. The rest of us will withdraw. Hilaruo had completely calmed down. It was precisely because of this that he said this. From this point alone, it could be seen that he was a ruthless person who would do anything to achieve his goals. Under the cover of darkness, the chaos on the battlefield, and the lag in information, Hilaruo escaped without a word. What he left behind were the corpses of nearly 5,000 cavalry, including Lumek, and the captives. Hilaruo made a very smart choice and left with less than 10 guards, so no one discovered his tracks. It wasn't until the battlefield was cleaned that they discovered that his corpse was nowhere to be found. But this wasn't important. What was important was that they had won this battle. The Jurchen cavalry had used their own strength to prove their ability and obtained Yang Chendong's attention. It was already late at night, and the short stone pile was still brightly lit with torches. After the battle, the Jurchen cavalry were still cleaning up the battlefield. Fortunately, Tiger's Mane arrived in time with the 6 cavalry battalions of the Independent Regiment, greatly increasing the speed of the cleanup. The 5-starred flag was still there as before, unfurling in the wind. Beta Persei had already prepared a military tent for him to rest in. More than usual, he had prepared an extra tent for Princess Tuoya. This time, Tuoya didn't escape. When the battle wasn't over, she even pulled out her saber, as if she wanted to charge down with Yang Qindong. Her image as a heroine won the basic respect of everyone. It was late at night, and Yang Qindong hadn't gone to bed yet. He called Tiger's Mane, Yila, Lu Dai, and the others over for an impromptu military meeting. Looking at Tiger's Mane and Yela, Yang Qindong's words of encouragement rang out. The Nuzan cavalry performed very well in this battle. You will be rewarded handsomely, and your contributions will be doubled. You will have the first pick of the captives to make up for the losses in this battle. After daybreak, collect the bodies of the martyrs and hold a memorial service. The Independent Regiment is worthy of praise for their timely rescue. The extra war horses will be used as a reward to gradually develop all of the infantry into cavalry. Thank you, young master. Thank you, 6th young master. Tiger's Mane, Yela, Lu Dai, and the others were all overjoyed. Although they had also lost people in this battle, especially the Nuzan cavalry who had lost close to 500 people, how could there be no deaths in a war? For the sake of Jurchen's future, this sacrifice was worth it. After the meeting, most of them didn't rest. Instead, they continued to clean up the battlefield. They dug several huge pits to bury the dead. This was also a form of respect for their opponents. Otherwise, in such an environment, the corpses of the dead soldiers would end up in the crows' hands. Summer nights were always very short. At around 3:00, the sky had already begun to brighten. The field of vision was vast, and the speed of cleaning up the battlefield became even faster. After burying the dead, Yela and Lu Dai also selected 500 elite soldiers from the captives. As long as they trained a little, they would be able to make up for the losses in the previous battle. Tiger's Mane counted the number of war horses. There were more than 4,000 of them. When the 10 infantry battalions arrived, all of them could be turned into cavalry. The cavalry and horses were like brothers. It was precisely because of this special relationship that when the cavalry charged, very few people would take the initiative to hurt the horses. Unless they couldn't fight, otherwise, no one would deliberately hurt the horses. In this way, it was convenient for the 5-star regiment and helped the Independent Regiment. When the sky was completely bright, breakfast was already ready. Smoke rose in spirals from the kitchen and the aroma of meat floated everywhere. Tuoya also woke up from her sleep in the tent. She looked at the 5-star army with a curious expression on her face. Breakfast was ready, but the 5-star army didn't satisfy their appetite. Instead, they gathered together and held a memorial service for the dead soldiers under the leadership of Yang Qindong. Their achievements were read out loud. Even the names of the people were read out by Yang Qindong. Many of the Nuzan cavalry cried at the scene. Obviously, after this memorial service, they were moved by Yang Qindong's actions and became more united. After killing a few Walla prisoners who refused to surrender to comfort the souls of the dead soldiers in heaven, breakfast began. Although the food was not as warm as before, none of the soldiers said anything about it. The memorial service still lingered in their minds for a long time. Some of them even thought that if they died in battle, their names would be read out by the 6th young master in front of everyone. Perhaps that would be the proudest moment of their lives. 7 a.m. The sun hung high in the sky. Anyone who knew about the weather knew that today was going to be another sunny day. At this time, a large number of cavalry suddenly appeared from the northeast direction of the short rock pile. A large number of cavalry appeared in the northeast direction. Everyone, get on your horses and get into formation. After the scouts at the front reported the news, the 5-star army became lively. No matter if it was the Nuzan cavalry or the soldiers of the Independent Regiment, no one felt afraid at this moment. Instead, they all revealed a firm fighting spirit. Perhaps people would die in war, but for some people, wasn't it a chance to show off? Tuoya stood at the highest point of the short rock pile and looked from afar. When she finally saw the enemy's flag, she jumped up like a little girl. It's the Mongol army of the Gobi Desert. It's the Mongol army of the Gobi Desert. Everyone, don't be nervous. They're on our side. The 5-star army didn't seem to hear them. Everyone's eyes were still filled with determination and killing intent. Report. A large number of infantry appeared in the east. It should be the independent regiment's infantry. The scout reported another piece of news. Yang Chendong, who was riding on the white dragon horse, smiled. Let Tiger's Mane bring them here. Commander Yen, come here. Yang Chendong pointed at Yenda, the company commander of the reconnaissance battalion who came to report the news. While the latter looked excited, Yang Chendong called him to his side and whispered something to him. Then, he nodded repeatedly and spurred his horse away. Soon, he disappeared without a trace. Tuoya didn't look at what Yang Chendong was doing. After seeing the 5-star army's strong fighting spirit, she was still full of fighting spirit even though she didn't have much rest last night. She left on her horse and went straight to meet the Mongol army of the Gobi Desert. After seeing the 5-star army's fighting strength, she didn't want her own army to be enemies with them. That wouldn't be a good thing. As soon as Tuoya left, Beta Persei came to Yang Chendong. Young master, Princess Tuoya still has a good impression of you. You might be a family in the future. Do you want me to tell the brothers to relax? Don't be so tense. You're acting like enemies. How can we be a family? Beta Persei, I think your skin is tight recently. It seems that the burden I gave you isn't heavy enough. How about this, after you go back this time, train the logistics camp well. The standard will be based on the results of the 3rd-class army assessment. Yang Chendong said with a smile that wasn't a smile. No, young master, I'm talking too much. I didn't say anything. Beta Persei kept waving his hands and immediately admitted defeat. How could he not know what the logistics camp was like? They were all old and weak Baiming captives. Some of their bodies could be described as thin as a match. It was a miracle that they could live until now. How could they be trained to the level of a 3rd-class army? Even a 4th-class army would barely touch the boundary. Beta Persei admitted defeat. Yang Chendong didn't want to pursue him. Instead, he looked at the approaching Gobi Desert Mongol army and said, remember, in this world, benefits are always as big as the sky. With enough benefits, enemies can become friends, and friends can become enemies. This requires us to be vigilant at all times. We can't make the mistake of underestimating the enemy because of taking things for granted. If that happens, we'll be the sinners of the army. Beta Persei nodded thoughtfully as he listened. Only Yang Chendong knew that the 5-star army could be considered as a lone army on the prairie. Any force here could become a friend or an enemy. Once a step was wrong, it could lead to eternal damnation. As the commander of an army, he must be careful. Tuoya rode a horse to meet the approaching Gobi Desert Mongol army. In the leading position of the army, she saw a middle-aged man in his 50s. A woman's voice of joy sounded first. Father, why are you here? Tuoya. When the middle-aged man saw that the person coming from afar was his only daughter, his frosty face finally changed and a smile appeared on his face. When the father and daughter reunited, Sudor Khan looked at his daughter and found that she didn't change at all. When he found that there wasn't a single wound on her body, the smile on his face slowly disappeared. Bao Yin came back and said that Hararuo, that bastard toad who wants to eat swan meat, brought a lot of cavalry to threaten you. Since you're fine now, where is he? Don't be afraid, although father came in a hurry this time, I also brought 20,000 cavalry. Sud's bloodline was a branch of the Golden family. Although it couldn't be said to be completely orthodox, there was a natural nobility in the bloodline. People like him were prideful. Once someone like him decided to do something, he would have a lot of charisma. Being able to gather 20,000 cavalry in such a short time was enough to show his ability. Chapter 687. Tuoya was very touched that her father had brought 20,000 cavalrymen to save her. But when it came to Haraluo, she still said proudly, Haraluo? He has already been defeated and fled. Ran away? Suede's expression froze. How many cavalrymen did he bring with him? And who was it that chased them away? Facing her father, Tuoya naturally wouldn't hide anything. She told him everything she had heard and seen. After she finished talking about Halaruo's defeat and Lumek's decapitation, she continued to chatter, Father, this 5-star army is very interesting. They even held a memorial service for the dead. They recited the names of all the dead soldiers. You don't know this, but many of the warriors who were still alive were moved to tears. Suede wasn't interested in this memorial service. In his opinion, they had held such a service before. Wasn't it just inviting people to cross the dead? What he was curious about was where this 5-star army came from and why they were so strong. Why hadn't he heard of them before? Of course, the memorial service wasn't an ordinary one. Tuoya didn't know about this, so she didn't explain. As for the 5-star army's strength, it was already proven. There was no need to explain. Tuoya, have you figured out the origin of this 5-star army? Suede was more curious about where this cavalryman who defeated Haraluo belonged to. Were they on good terms with the Mongols? Walla? What about Tatar or Great Ming? I don't know. Tuoya was suddenly interrupted by her father. She looked a little unhappy. However, this was her father, who she had always treated with dignity and respect since she was young. She could only think about it in her heart, but she didn't dare to show it. Suede had expected Tuoya to say she didn't know, so he didn't pursue the matter. Instead, he continued to ask, you said they fought for an entire night and didn't rest? Then they should be very tired, right? Previously, Bao Yin reported that the enemy cavalry had a type of armor that was not afraid of ordinary swords and spears. That is definitely something good. Do you think that if we attack now, these things will fall into the hands of our Mongol army? Suda's tone changed, and he looked like he was about to snatch it. When Tuoya heard this, her eyes couldn't help but widen. Father, that kind of black armor is very powerful. Even when I wanted to buy it before, they didn't have any intention of selling it. Because that thing is too powerful, even if we want to snatch it, it won't be easy. Besides, they just saved my daughter's life. Tuoya naturally didn't want the Mongol army and the 5-star army to fight. Let's not talk about who wins and who loses first. When two tigers fight, one of them is bound to be injured. At that time, no matter who won or lost, it would not be the result she wanted to see. Tuoya's impatience had already shown on her face, and she seemed to want to dissuade him. However, Suda had already opened his mouth. Let's see. We want to buy it but they won't sell it. Then we can only snatch it. As for battle strength, don't you have confidence in our Mongol army? As for them saving you, it was just along the way. They were saving themselves. With just a few words, he made the 5-star army look like they had nothing to do. It also revealed his determination to fight. They had just wiped out Hararuo's 5,000 cavalry and seized Jingfeng. They had just gone through a huge battle and were exhausted. If they didn't attack now, it would be difficult to find a suitable opportunity. Kamobala secretly passed down the order. When I give the order, the entire army will charge. Since he had made the decision, Suda naturally wouldn't be disturbed by others. He gave the order in front of Tuoya. Kamobala, translated from Chinese, meant white tiger. This person was indeed the bravest general by Suda's side. Knowing that there was a battle to fight, he immediately agreed with a face full of excitement. He turned around and let his personal guard pass the message. Father, you can't. Tuoya's eyes were filled with shock. She knew the battle strength of the 5-star army. She also knew how powerful those black cavalry guards were. Although they had just gone through a huge battle, she felt that when facing Hararuo's 5,000 cavalry, the 5-star army didn't use their full strength. At least, that young Master Yang didn't show any signs of worry. When she thought of that young face and his casual attitude towards everything, Tuoya didn't know why, but she felt a wave of uncertainty in her heart. Bao Yin, take the princess away. If she shouts again, seal her mouth. Suda seemed to know that Tuoya would stop him and was already prepared. After giving the order, Bao Yin walked out from the troops and looked at Tuoya with a troubled expression. Princess, I'm sorry. After saying that, 2 cavalrymen walked in front of Tuoya and forcefully brought her to the back of the troops. Without any obstruction, Suda rode on his horse and led the 20,000 cavalrymen forward. In order to avoid alerting the enemy, he didn't speed up. On the surface, everything seemed normal. Tuoya had already said that there were less than 10,000 soldiers in the 5-star army. Among them, there were 4,000 infantrymen. In front of his 20,000 cavalrymen, this kind of strength was indeed not enough. On top of a pile of rocks, Yang Chendong gently put down his binoculars and a look of contempt flashed across his face. Inform everyone to prepare for battle. Oh. This time, Beta Persei didn't object. He also used his binoculars to see the scene of Tuoya being forcefully taken away. Because of this, he also knew that everything was as the young master had predicted. This Mongol army that came from afar was not a friend, but an enemy. After the order was given and knowing that there was going to be a huge battle, whether it was the Nuzan cavalry or Tiger's Mane's independent regiment, they all became excited. However, although the latter was excited, when he saw the 10 auxiliary troops that had just arrived, he couldn't help but scratch his head. Although they had war horses now, they didn't have time to adapt. If the cavalrymen and war horses didn't get used to each other and there wasn't enough communication, forcefully entering the battlefield was no different from courting death. They simply couldn't display their original strength. Don't distribute the horses anymore. Everyone, prepare the infantry formation and prepare to meet the enemy. Tiger's Mane indeed gave the order. On the battlefield, cavalry wasn't necessarily stronger than infantrymen. Although this was the case in theory, it was best to choose the one that was suitable for oneself. Reluctantly giving up on the horses that were about to be theirs, the 10 battalions, a total of 4,000 soldiers of the independent regiment, began to form into battle formations. Each of them held spears that were specially designed to deal with cavalry, forming a square formation as they searched for a suitable place for them to fight. Yang Chendong still chose to fight at the short pile of rocks. He was indeed thankful for this kind of terrain. If it was a wide area, the enemy's 20,000 cavalrymen would be able to charge back and forth and break the formation of the 5-star army. At that time, even if they could obtain the final victory, who knew what kind of heavy price they would have to pay because of it? Of course, although the terrain was suitable, the opportunity was not within Yang Chendong's expectations. They just came out to take a short break and wanted to find a quiet place to rest for half a day. However, they did end up in a huge battle. The 5-star army that had just gone through a battle and hadn't had a good rest, obviously hadn't fully recovered their strength. For the same reason, the Mongol army from Gobi also came from afar and didn't have a good rest after a night of rushing. In this comparison, it was a draw and no one would have a big advantage. The 20,000 Mongol cavalry were still slowly closing in. They were not in a rush and were approaching from afar. The distance between the two sides quickly shortened from 3 li to 2 li. When they were half a li away, Beta Persei was already in front of the Mongol army. My young master said that in front of us is our area. Please stop here, otherwise, it will hurt the peace between both sides. Beta Persei rode on his horse and said with a loud voice. He had a loud voice to begin with, and without any restraint, his voice traveled far and wide. At least at this moment, the armies on both sides could hear him clearly. The 5-star army actually discovered his army's intentions in time. This was somewhat out of head Suitor's expectations. He didn't know that Yang Chendong and the others were watching his every move with binoculars. He also didn't know that Yang Chendong, who had undergone lip-reading training, had already seen through every word he said. But this was no longer important. Since the other side was about to shed all pretense of cordiality, what was there to hesitate about? Head Suitor looked at Beta Persei and said, "This place has been our Mongol territory since ancient times. You Han people have already crossed the line by appearing here. What reason do you have for us to stop? It seems that your 5-star army is too arrogant. Do you really think that you are invincible just because you defeated the incompetent Halal? What a joke. After a burst of laughter, head suitor looked at Beta Persei again. His eyes were filled with killing intent. And you actually dare to stand in front of this Khan. Do you know that you are playing with fire by doing this? Now that we are so close, I can capture you with a wave of my hand. Where do you think you are going to run? Head suitor's face was filled with anger and hatred as he spoke. Once upon a time, the Mongols were so mighty. Their ancestors had crossed the Eurasian continent, and no matter where they went, they had no opponents. It was because of the appearance of the great Ming dynasty that their legend of invincibility was broken. Emperor Zhu Di of the Ming dynasty personally led the army to attack the Mongols 5 times and suppressed their former glory. Just based on this, he had no reason to be nice to the Han people. Perhaps in head suitor's heart, he had already classified the 5-star army as the Ming dynasty's army. Chapter 688. You want to capture me? Beta Persei had a look of disdain in the face of the arrogant suitor. How about it? Do you still dare to resist? Suitor's face darkened when he saw that a small messenger of the enemy dared to show off in front of him. He was furious. Resist? Ha ha ha. This time, it was Beta Persei's turn to laugh. He didn't learn much from following Yang Qindong every day, but he did learn about 80% of his calmness and pretentiousness. The word resist is used by the weak against the strong. You're not the strong ones now, so the word resist is not appropriate. What I should say is, do you still resist? Believe it or not, we can bet that your people will never be able to get within 3 steps of me. Impudent. Suda had never been looked down upon like this before. Even someone of Agar Dorji's status would be polite to him. Even if he had a strong killing intent in his heart, he would not show any disrespect on his face. However, this foolish and boorish messenger had ignored him in front of so many people. Yes, he was stupid and crude. Otherwise, how could he be so blind and dare to threaten him at such a close distance? Although some people said that envoys were not killed in a war between 2 armies. But when one's strength reached a certain level, so what if one broke the rules? The rules were meant to be broken, weren't they? In a fit of rage, Suitor pointed his index finger at Beta Persei in front of him and said through gritted teeth, "Who's going to take him down for this Khan?" As soon as Suitor shouted, a guard behind him immediately responded, "Khan, leave this small fry to me to deal with." To be able to stand behind Suitor, he was either a general or a guard. But no matter which type it was, they were all very agile and vigorous. As soon as he finished speaking, a rider rushed out from the group and shouted at Beta Persei to approach him step by step. 10 steps, 8 steps, 6 steps, and he was getting closer and closer. On the other hand, Tiger's mane acted as if he didn't see anything. He stood there unhurriedly, allowing the other party to come closer as if he didn't hear anything. 5 steps. 3 steps. The big hand had already reached out and was about to touch Beta Persei's body when suddenly, the sound of a horn rang out. The person who was rushing over lost his balance and fell to the ground with a plop. The man landed on the horse, causing the warhorse to neigh. It seemed to be crying out for its master, but it also seemed to be summoning its master. Ah! It's a gun. Suda was indeed a Khan. He was experienced and knowledgeable. When the situation suddenly changed, he instinctively shouted and then quickly hid behind a few of his personal guards. When Huachong shouted, not only Suitor Khan, even General Zamobila, who was known as the White Tiger, quickly hid behind a few of his personal guards and completely hid his body. Originally, they were aggressive and wanted to capture Beta Persei and punish him. But unexpectedly, the situation changed. The people they sent out died before they could even touch the corner of Beta Persei's clothes. This change shocked many of the Mongolian cavalry, especially the personal guards who were used as shields in front of them. Everyone's expression changed drastically. They were afraid that they would become the target in the next second and die on their horses. Ha, ha ha ha, Beta Persei saw the Mongolian cavalry's reaction and he laughed mockingly. Where's the person who spoke to me just now? Did he hide in his turtle shell like a tortoise? Ha ha ha. As the Khan of the Mongolian desert, when had Suitor ever been looked down upon like this? Beta Persei's shout was so loud that it was clearly a slap to his face. Even if he hid behind his personal guards, he still felt a burning pain on his face. On top of the short rocks, the black cavalry guards were standing with their spears. The shot just now was aimed at Yang Chendong's head and tail. At a distance of more than 700 meters, it was not easy to kill the enemy without hurting Beta Persei. Sixth young master, why didn't you finish off that old Khan Suitor just now? Qiu V, the captain of the first guard, asked with a puzzled expression as he looked at the enemy with his gun. Not only him, but the rest of the guards also listened attentively. They also did not understand the sixth young master's actions. However, Yang Chendong shook his head helplessly. Princess Tuoya once said that her father, Khan Suitor, has the bloodline of the Golden Family. Once such a person is killed, it's equivalent to fighting the entire Mongolian army to the death. Right now, we're not strong enough. If others don't provoke us, we don't need to kill them all. But if we kill this Suitor, we'll become enemies with the entire Mongolian army. Even if it's for our dignity, we won't be able to live in peace with them anymore. If Yang Chendong's goal was like Zhu Di's, which was to conquer the grasslands for the next few decades of peace in the Ming dynasty, of course, he would have directly killed Suitor just now. But his goal was much bigger than this. In order to resolve a momentary hatred, killing Suitor would cut off the possibility of cooperation with the entire Mongolian army. Clearly, the gains did not make up for the losses. On this side, Yang Chendong was still explaining the overall situation to the guards. On Beta Persei's side, he was still cursing. He really did not care about the fact that Suitor was a Khan. Where was Suitor's face? Being constantly mocked and ridiculed, Suitor's entire body was already trembling. He could not let the other party continue. Otherwise, his lifetime of wisdom would be destroyed in a day. It seemed that the other party already knew his intentions. Since that was the case, he would just have to force his way through. He did not believe that with his absolute advantage in numbers, he would not be able to destroy the other party. Beta Persei was still cursing, "You're the ones who are ungrateful. Previously, my young master risked countless dangers to save your princess, and now you want to start a war with us? Everyone says that you Mongolians are born righteous, but what are you doing now? Where's your gratitude? Where's your sense of shame? Do you still have any shame? Bah! Even if we saved a dog, it would still know to wag its tail at us to express its gratitude. When we need them, they can even guard the house. But the person who saved you, you want to hurt your benefactor? Where's your bottom line? What's the difference between you and an animal? No. You're worse than an animal. Ah. I'm so angry. Suitor could not hold back anymore. Suddenly, he shouted and interrupted Beta Persei's voice, "Mongolian warriors, the other party used firearms just now. They are undoubtedly the Ming army. Thinking back, how many of our ancestors died in the hands of the Ming army? Now, the Ming dynasty is no longer the same as before. The Walla is fighting with them and has gained a certain advantage. They are no longer the world's strongest army. Now is the time for us to avenge our ancestors. Listen to my command, charge. Charge." General Zamubala also hid behind his bodyguard and shouted. When they were scolded by Beta Persei, many of the Mongolian soldiers lowered their heads and the morale of the entire army dropped by a lot. Now that Suitor's shout mentioned the hatred of their ancestors, everyone's common hatred for the enemy was stimulated from the bottom of their hearts. Just as the order to charge was given, the 20,000 cavalrymen shouted and suddenly charged forward like a flood of fierce beasts. Oh my God! Beta Persei was still scolding to his heart's content when the enemy suddenly moved. He shouted and turned his horse around to leave. 1 against 10,000, no matter how strong he was, it was impossible for him to win. Beta Persei turned around and ran, accompanied by bursts of gunfire. As the bullets whistled through the air, the Mongolian cavalrymen charging at the front were shot down one by one. This hindered the enemy's attack and gave Beta Persei a chance and time to escape. Suitor, who was hiding behind his bodyguard, felt that the cavalrymen were being suppressed and could not help but shout, "Everyone, don't be afraid. Firearms are single-use items. Every shot counts. Everyone, charge together. They won't be able to hurt any of us. Charge, charge. Everyone, split the gold, silver, and horses in their hands." In order to raise morale, Suitor promised to split the spoils equally. As soon as he said this, the Mongolian cavalrymen who were still hesitating shouted and charged forward. In the face of enough benefits, even if there was danger, there were still people who would take the risk. On the pile of short rocks, Yang Chendong led the two bodyguards and kept firing bullets. One after another, the Mongolian cavalrymen fell on the road ahead. However, the cavalrymen were too fast. In the blink of an eye, they had rushed forward from the original distance of 1.5 miles. At that moment, their bows and arrows could already be fired. Yang Chendong and the bodyguards had no choice but to put on their masks to protect themselves. The arrows fell like rain. Compared to their fighting skills on horseback, the Mongolian cavalrymen who were known to have grown up on horseback performed very well. They were either riding on horseback, shooting arrows while climbing on horseback, or shooting arrows while hanging upside down from a golden hook. For a moment, arrows rained down like rain, landing on Yang Chendong and the others, producing a series of crackling sounds. Fire. Charge. Under the pile of short rocks, Yella led the Jurchens and started a fierce counterattack. The same arrows were shot out and landed among the Mongolian army, causing the cavalrymen to fall off their horses. Fire. Fire. At the independent regiment, Tiger's man ordered the 10 infantry battalions to fire arrows from afar. At the same time, he led 6 cavalry battalions into the designated area. He wanted to rely on the advantageous terrain and take advantage of the fact that the enemy could not fully deploy their forces to attack. In the process of charging, the vanguard of the Mongolian cavalrymen were first attacked by the Style 95 and then by the arrows. They suffered heavy losses. The general who led the team saw that they had lost more than 30% of their forces before they even reached the enemy. He had no choice but to change the direction of the assault. He no longer shot at Yang Chendong but at the Jurchens. Yang Chendong's side became quiet again. "Look, is there anyone injured?" "Sixth young master, our armor is impenetrable. There are no injured members." Cho Wu and Dao Xiao, the 2 captains, checked the armor and reported. Chapter 689. Okay, then let's prepare to counterattack. Look carefully and shoot. We have to hit them until they can't even find north. Yang Chendong took off the Type 95 pistol from his back and reloaded it with a new magazine. Then, he aimed and pulled the trigger. Beta Persei had already returned to the team and was also aiming with the Type 95 pistol. There were simply too many Mongol cavalry and they were everywhere in sight. This made it so that they didn't need to aim too much. They just needed to fire based on their instincts, and often, an enemy would be shot and fall off their horse. Although the number of guards was limited, wherever they aimed, the Mongolian army would be heavily injured. This greatly suppressed the enemy's morale and courage. Still hiding behind his bodyguard, Swade stared at the pile of short rocks with a face full of anger. He couldn't understand how the enemy's muskets were so powerful that they could shoot so many bullets and injure so many of his soldiers. "No, we can't let them kill without any scruples. Men, send out 1,000 cavalry and charge forward. I don't care what method we use, we have to destroy these people. We can't let them become a threat." As soon as the Khan gave the order, a cavalry of 1,000 men charged towards the pile of rocks. "They're finally here." Yang Chendong had already expected that the enemy would send troops to restrain him. He sneered, "Fire at them. I want to see if they're made of iron." Facing our bullets, will they be afraid? It was only 1,000 cavalrymen, so Yang Qindong and the guards didn't really care about them. After everyone agreed in unison, they turned the muzzles and aimed at the charging cavalrymen and pulled the trigger. As gunshots rang out, countless cavalrymen fell off their horses. Although they charged very quickly, they still lost more than half of their forces in the process. Put away your guns. Attack. Seeing that the enemy was less than 100 meters away from him, Suede immediately shouted. Yang Qindong immediately put the 95 style on his back and pulled out his cavalry saber. With a shout, he rushed towards the pile of short rocks. Along with him were more than 100 black cavalry guards. They charged down like ferocious tigers. With their sturdy armor, it was as if they had entered an unstoppable state. They could cut down and kill whoever they wanted. The Mongolian cavalry fell off their horses one after another. Streams of blood flew out and dyed the sabers red. The setting sun was like blood. The Nuzhan cavalry had already been surrounded by the Mongol vanguard. Both sides were engaged in a bloody battle. Dust flew up once again, and the only thing that could be heard were the roars and shouts of killing. As the Mongolian general, Kamubala didn't choose the Nuzhan cavalry as his opponent. With the idea of picking the weakest among them, he set his sights on the 10 infantry battalions of the independent regiment. The advantage of cavalry against infantry was quite obvious. Looking from afar, infantry didn't have the mobility of cavalry. They formed a square formation with 400 men. They formed a tight square formation with black shields around them to protect their own safety. Outside the square formation, there were rows of barricades. It was as if they were telling the cavalry not to provoke them or they would be hurt. Let's kill these infantry first. Samubala said bluntly. Clearly, he didn't care about the formation of the infantrymen. The cavalry behind him was already eager to give it a try. The sabers in their hands were also ready to taste blood. As soon as the order was given, they would engulf and drown the infantry phalanx in an overwhelming manner. Kill. Zamubala raised the saber in his hand, and a crazed expression appeared on his face. He opened his mouth wide and swung his right arm forward. His legs clamped down hard, and the warhorse under him leaped forward as if their hearts were connected. In front of the infantry formation, there were hundreds of shield-wielding soldiers. They tried their best to hide behind the 1-meter-tall iron shields. When the cavalry launched their attack, waves of arrows fell on the shields like raindrops. Crackling sounds could be heard. When the cavalry attacked the infantry, they would use bows and arrows to kill them. If used well, a wave of arrows could often severely injure the enemy. When the cavalry truly arrived, the morale of the army would be crushed. In other words, the infantry could only passively defend against the cavalry's attack. It was as natural as a cat eating a mouse. However, when the 5-star army was involved in this matter, it was a completely different matter. Only defending and not attacking wasn't their habit. Split. After seeing the shield-bearers block the enemy's first wave of arrows, the battalion commanders of each infantry phalanx shouted out loud. The originally airtight square formation suddenly split into two from the middle. In the middle of the square formation, there were hundreds of musketeers. Some of them were lying on the ground, some were half-squatting, and some were standing. They were divided into several echelons and formed a unique scenery. Fire! 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 When the battalion commander gave the order to attack with a hoarse roar, the 100 gunmen with Type 81 rifles began to spit out their own tongues of fire. As the gunshots rang out, the enemy riders fell to the ground one by one in coordination with the sound of the gunshots. Since they were prepared, the Mongol cavalry were caught off guard. Some of them were just brandishing their sabers when they were shot in the chest. Some of them had just jumped over the barricades when they were shot in midair along with their horses. Some of them were running with their heads down when they felt a sharp pain in their chest and fell off their horses with a plop. Even more of them had lost their lives before they could even figure out what had happened. Even if they were dead, their horses were still running forward without them knowing. Luckily, the dense barricades were effective. In the end, without the guidance of their owners, the war horses were forced to stop in front of the barricades. The musketeers were the original auxiliary soldiers. The current independent regiment was built on the foundation of the 6 auxiliary battalions. In other words, there were more than 2,000 auxiliary soldiers who knew how to use guns well. Now, there were only 10 infantry formations, and each formation only had 100 gunners. It was easy to gather them. This was also the trump card that Tiger Edge had prepared when training the infantry of the independent regiment. Now that it was used, it brought about an astonishing power and effect. The 1,000 auxiliary soldiers each held a Type 81 rifle that was much more powerful than the Type 81 rifles of this era. When the sound of gunshots rang out and the enemy cavalry was killed one by one on their horses, it was a shocking sight. Even the soldiers of the other independent regiments who were captured during the Battle of Liaohe were shocked by the strength of the auxiliary soldiers. It wasn't that they hadn't seen muskets before. In fact, because they were all comrades, they had even seen them up close. It was just that before they became auxiliary soldiers, they didn't even have the right to touch a gun. Because of this, many of their comrades were angry. They thought, "What are you guys so proud of? Isn't it just muskets? The Great Ming Empire already has these things in their army." However, when they saw and experienced everything, they were still shocked. They were both muskets, but there were obviously too many differences. For example, the stability, continuity, lethality, and so on. Although they only served in the new, Gandusi region and didn't have the chance to come into contact with muskets, they could still feel the difference between the muskets in their comrades' hands and the Great Ming Empires. This was because if the Great Ming Empire had muskets with such lethality, with their advantage in numbers, would there be anyone who could be their opponent? The Divine Arms Battalion. Zamubala's face, which was as red as blood, showed a horrified expression. Decades ago, the Great Ming Empire relied on the muskets of the Divine Arms Battalion to defeat their ancestors. After all these years, they originally thought that the Great Ming Empire had been divided into the north and the south. They originally thought that Baiming was an arrow at the end of its flight after the incident at the Tuma fortress. It was time for the Mongolians to rise again. But now, when they saw the scene of thousands of muskets firing at the same time, they knew that the misfortune of the Mongolians had arrived again. It was just a charge, but they lost thousands of cavalrymen. These were all the good men of the Mongolians in the Gobi Desert. They all had families, brothers, and sisters. Now that they had all died in battle here, how was he going to explain it? Zamubala felt like he had punched an iron plate. He originally thought that it would be an easy move to use cavalry to deal with infantry. But now, they had suffered heavy losses before they could even charge over. If they continued to fight, how many of their brothers would they have to lose before they could obtain a victory? They were no longer as arrogant as before, nor were they as confident as before. Zamubala wanted to pass on what happened here to the Khan. How could their 20,000 cavalrymen deal with such a powerful enemy who possessed firearms? Zamubala felt a headache coming on. Khan Sud also felt a headache coming on. It was not because of anything else, but because a scout had reported that a large number of cavalrymen had suddenly appeared on both sides of them. Although they could not see the situation of the other party, they should be enemies and not friends. Why are there still enemies? Didn't Tuoya say that the 5-star army has less than 10,000 soldiers? Khan Sud's expression changed from the confident look he had before. He started to feel conflicted. He believed that even if the enemies that appeared on both sides were on the same side as the 5-star army, with his 20,000 Mongolian soldiers, he did not have to worry about losing. But after spending so much effort, and in the end, sacrificing 800 of his own men to kill 1,000 of his enemies, just to fight a bloody battle with a 5-star army that he didn't have much hatred for. Was it worth it? What was his goal? Just as he was conflicted over this question, one of Zamubala's soldiers ran over. Khan, something bad happened. The enemy has the Divine Arms Battalion, the Divine Arms Battalion. What's the matter? Why are you making such a big fuss? Khan Sud was already in a bad mood. When he was shouted, his expression became even worse. Isn't it just the Divine Arms Battalion? I already know. Chapter 690. Of course, Suda knew. Previously, when Beta Persei came over to persuade them not to act rashly, he fired his flintlock, which gave the other party a chance to escape. Flintlocks were indeed one of the nemeses of cavalry, but it was only effective when there were a lot of them. Seeing that Sud Khan didn't seem to pay attention to his shouts, the bodyguard thought for a moment and realized where the problem was. Thus, he shouted again, "Khan, it's thousands of Great Ming's Divine Machine Battalion. They all have powerful flintlocks in their hands. General Zamubala has suffered heavy losses after charging several times." This time, the problem was finally explained clearly, and Suda's expression became more and more unsightly. What? Thousands of Great Ming's Divine Machine Battalion? That must be the Divine Machine Battalion. My God, how is this the 5-star army? It's clearly the main force of the Great Ming Dynasty. How did we end up fighting against them? Finally, Suda realized how stupid of a decision he had made. He actually treated the main force of the Great Ming Dynasty as a soft persimmon. When he thought of the scene of the Great Ming Dynasty sweeping through the grassland decades ago, he felt a chill in his bones. Quickly go and tell General Zamubala to retreat, retreat. Since they already knew the true situation of the 5-star army, and more importantly, they knew that the enemy had a powerful weapon like the Divine Strategy Battalion. In that case, there was no need for them to continue fighting. If they continued fighting, they would only suffer even greater losses. Looking at the somewhat chaotic battlefield and the dust that filled the sky, no matter how unwilling Suda was, he still made a very unwilling order, pass down the order, all troops retreat. Finally, the order to retreat was issued. Hearing this, the soldier who passed down the order breathed a sigh of relief for some reason. He was also a cavalryman who had experienced countless battles, but he had never paid such a heavy price in such a short period of time like today. It hadn't even been 2 hours since the start of the war, but as far as he knew, the number of cavalrymen who died in the battle had already reached 3,000. This was still the number of Mongolian soldiers who couldn't be counted. Now, no matter how big the smoke was, it would be difficult to calm down until the result was clear. Even if they lost 3,000 cavalry in 2 hours, it was not a pain that the Mongol army could bear. The 5-star army's reinforcements were about to arrive. Retreating now was the wisest choice. The messenger replied loudly and turned around to pass on the message. For a period of time, regardless of whether it was the Mongolian cavaliers who were fiercely attacking Yang Chendong's cavaliers at the pile of short rocks or Kambala's men who wanted to take advantage of the situation and use their cavaliers to fight against the infantrymen, when they received the news, all of them sighed in relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders. Then, they ordered their army to retreat. Zamubala wanted to take advantage of the situation but didn't succeed. Seeing that the situation wasn't good, he wanted to retreat. How could Tiger's Mane give in? Previously, when Zamubala was dealing with the infantry, he didn't have any intention of helping out with the 6 cavalry battalions. This was because he believed in the strength of the infantry battalions. He knew how powerful these infantry battalions were with Type 81 guns. Now that the other party had suffered a loss and was afraid, it was time for him to take advantage of the situation. Come on, cavalry warriors of the independent regiment, it's time for us to perform. Charge with your regiment commander. Tiger's Mane acted just like how he dealt with Hilaruo's cavaliers. He was the first to charge forward on his horse. Following behind him were 6 battalions, more than 2,000 cavalry warriors with sharp sabers in their hands. They had been conserving their energy at the side. Now that it was finally time for them to act, how could they be courteous? All of them fought to be the first to charge forward and kill the enemy. At the pile of short rocks, the Mongolian cavaliers used various methods to try to surround Yang Chendong's troops. However, after all of them failed, they finally became obedient. Facing the mouth, nose, and eyes that could be injured, they were all helpless. Luckily, the messenger passed on a new order. The Khan ordered the army to retreat. Instantly, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. They didn't stop and turned around to leave. Young master, they are retreating. Beside Yang Chendong, Beta Persei, who was already covered in blood from all the killing, panted heavily as he spoke with a look of satisfaction. It was no wonder that Beta Persei had such a reaction. When he was by the young master's side in the past, he was always worried about the dangers on the front lines. Under normal circumstances, he would be at the command center. This time, relying on the advantage of the black armor and the might of the warhorse, he had finally reached the front lines. Now that he could kill to his heart's content, how could he not be carefree? They are going to escape, but can they escape? Raise the command flag, order the cavaliers to strengthen the 1st and 2nd Regiment to intercept the Mongolian cavaliers. This time, if we don't skin them alive, they can forget about escaping from the hands of this young master. Yang Chendong's eyes flashed with determination. Long before the Mongolian army appeared, the 1st and 2nd Regiment had already rushed to the pile of rocks. However, Yang Chendong didn't let them enter the battlefield immediately. He needed to leave behind a group of fresh troops to face any difficulties and unknown dangers. Since the enemy had retreated, it was naturally time to use their backup plan. Since they had chosen to be his enemy and his warning didn't work, then they had to be prepared for any serious consequences. On the pile of rocks, the command flag was raised high, conveying the 6th young master's order. Outside the battlefield, Wind Chaser and Lu Zhua had received the order and brought a total of 5,200 cavaliers to prepare to stop the enemy. Not long after Sud Khan gave the order to retreat, Zamubala and the others brought the army back. Compared to when they went to battle, they were naturally in a much more difficult situation. Alright, the Han people have a good saying. Victory and defeat are common in war. This time, we lost, but as long as we preserve our strength, we can get it back in the next battle. Now, everyone prepare to retreat. Sud Khan's eyes scanned all the generals and said with a helpless and sorrowful voice. Khan, we still have many cavaliers that haven't returned from the battlefield. Are we waiting? Zamubala looked back at the 4,000 cavaliers that were still fighting in the dust and asked hesitantly when he heard that they were going to retreat now. We're not waiting anymore. Everything depends on their fate. To tell you the truth, a large number of the 5-star army has appeared behind us. Even if we go back now, we have to be prepared to be intercepted. Alright, let's not delay any longer and leave now. To be able to become a Khan, one had to have a strong will. A loss was a loss. The most important thing was how to preserve the greatest strength in the face of a loss. As for sacrificing some people, although he felt some pain in his heart, he didn't even blink his eyes. The Khan had a strong will. Furthermore, they knew that the 5-star army was approaching from behind. Who would say anything else? They immediately started to retreat. Zamubala received the order, and together with Bao Yin, each led 5,000 cavalrymen to meet Zhui Feng and Lu Zhua's troops who wanted to intercept them. Siyu led 2,000 cavaliers and his daughter Tuoya through the battlefield and returned from the northeast direction. Although the Mongol army had an absolute advantage in numbers, they still paid the price of 2,000 cavaliers before retreating when they faced the 1st and 2nd Regiment that had been looking forward to a big battle. This was because the 6th young master's flag had clearly stated that they shouldn't chase a cornered enemy. Otherwise, if they were bitten by them, they might have to pay twice the price. Sud Khan retreated, or it could be said that he had escaped. The remaining 4,000 cavaliers that were fighting the Nuzan cavalry did not know about this. The commander of the independent regiment, Tiger's Mane, was ordered to bring 6 battalions of soldiers into the battle. After some instructions, the Nuzan cavalry retreated from the battlefield, leaving only 2,000 Mongol cavaliers searching for their opponents. The 1st and 2nd Regiment also came to the main battlefield. Along with them were the 2,000 war horses that they had just captured, as well as 200 captured Mongol cavaliers. 1st Regiment Zhui Feng reporting to the 6th Young Master, 2nd Regiment Commander Lu Zhua reporting to the 6th Young Master. Good, you guys came at the right time. Regiment Commander Lu, call Battalion Commander Teimu, over. Yang Chendong nodded at the 2 regimental commanders who had just arrived. He then called out 3rd Battalion Commander Teimu, 3rd Battalion Commander, come over. The 6th Young Master is looking for you. Lu Zhua turned around and shouted. Under everyone's envious gazes, Taimu jumped off his horse and ran over to Yang Qindong. 2nd Regiment Commander Taimu greets the 6th young master. He gave a somewhat awkward military salute. Although it was not standard, it was obvious that this Mongol general was trying his best to adapt to the 5-star army's military rules. He returned the salute and lowered his hand. After Taimu lowered his hand, Yang Qindong pointed at the battlefield. There are about 2,000 Mongol cavaliers here. I'll give you a chance. You can convince as many of them as you want to live. If you don't want to surrender, then you can die. Do you understand? Understood, 6th young master. Taimu's body trembled. When he understood what the 6th young master meant, he immediately gave a solemn military salute. As a Mongol, he naturally did not want to see his comrades die in front of him. Hence, he would do his best to complete this task. Without their opponents, the Mongolian cavaliers became quiet. Gradually, the dust in the air around them finally settled down, and everything that happened on the battlefield was clearly displayed before everyone's eyes. The 2,000 Mongol cavaliers who thought that they had killed all their opponents wanted to cheer in unison for victory. However, when they could clearly see what was happening around them, they saw countless arrows aimed at their chests. At that moment, many of them revealed panicked expressions. What's going on? Where's our Khan? Where's our Mongol army? Don't tell me they were all killed. Chapter 691. That's not possible. Our Khan is so wise. Our Mongolian army has so many people and is so strong. It's impossible for anything to happen to them. Alright, can't you see? The number of enemies has increased again. They must have defeated the Khan. The Khan must have given up on us and left us. Then what should we do? Fight them to the death? That's right. What should we do? After the truth came to light, all sorts of discussions could be heard. However, they were all speaking in Mongolian, so they couldn't affect the 5-star army's cavalry that surrounded them. Of course, even if they could understand their language, the iron discipline of the soldiers did not allow them to have any other thoughts. Everyone, quiet down. Just as the 2,000 Mongolian soldiers did not know where to go, a loud Mongolian voice rang out in everyone's ears. Taimu rode on his horse like a lion patrolling its territory and appeared in front of the surrounded Mongolian soldiers. Behind Taimu were 2 other carriages. One of the carriages was filled with a mountain of silver and many iron pots, bowls, and other daily necessities. There were also jars of unopened wine. The other carriage was filled with shiny cavalry swords and sharp feathered bows. There was also black armor that gave off a dark and bloodthirsty glow. The moment the 2 carriages appeared, they attracted the attention of the 2,000 Mongolian soldiers. During the Great Ming Dynasty, the Mongolians fought for iron pots because they did not have them. It was not because iron pots were a luxury. Furthermore, the Mongolians did not have the skills and materials to forge iron pots. Without iron pots, they could not cook meat. At that time, the Great Ming Dynasty was afraid that the Mongolians would buy iron pots and forge them into weapons. Therefore, the Mongolians could only snatch iron pots. As a result, a group of fully armed Mongolian soldiers would often harass the Han people just to snatch an iron pot. It was quite a comical scene. Taimu was a Mongolian. He was very clear about what the Mongolians needed and desired. Instead of trying to persuade or reason with these people, it would be better to give them something tangible and give them what they desired the most. Noticing the greed and excitement in the eyes of the Mongolian cavalryman, Taimu knew that he had made the right move. With confidence, he said loudly, "Do you see that? As long as you're willing to surrender and join the 5-star army, all of these things will be yours. Not only that, you'll also be able to receive a decent amount of money every month. If you perform meritorious deeds on the battlefield, you'll even receive additional rewards. It can be said that the 5-star army has many good things that no one can imagine. You are all brave warriors. The 6th young master because he respects you." Of course, if anyone wants to be unconventional and want to repay your Khan's kindness with death, you can also take out your saber and stand out. I will stand right here and will not move an inch. If you have the ability, then just kill me. At this point, Temu took the initiative to pause for a moment before saying, of course, you have to think it through before you act. If you draw your sabers, you might die before me. As long as you've made up your mind, you can do it. Oh right, I'm afraid you don't know what happened just now. Your Khan Sud fled when he realized that he was no match for my 5-star army. I didn't tell you anything. I have to say, you are all abandoned children. I really feel sorry for you. For a Khan like this, is there any need for you to serve him? Isn't it too worth it? When Temu finished speaking, there were still a few Mongolian soldiers who wanted to test his saber with their own bodies. Some of them had received Sud's kindness. If it wasn't for this Khan, their lives would be very difficult. However, when they heard the last sentence and heard that Sud had abandoned them, the Mongolian soldiers who wanted to step forward and show their loyalty hesitated. It was not worth it to risk their lives for a Khan who abandoned them. None of the Mongolian soldiers rushed forward. This was within Temu's expectations. The 5-star army soldiers were all around them. Unless they didn't want to live anymore, who would take the initiative to rush out and die? Good. Since no one objects, I will take it that you have chosen to surrender. Now, I will ask the warriors in the west to throw their weapons on the ground, dismount and surrender. Everyone else, follow. I only want to say that we are very sincere. If anyone wants to play tricks with us, you can try using your own life. After Temu said this, he looked at the soldiers in the west and said, you have 3 breaths. If you don't surrender immediately, don't blame us for being impolite. 1. 2. Finally, under Temu's slow and drawn-out voice, a Mongolian cavalryman threw down the saber in his hand and jumped down from his warhorse. Holding the reins of his warhorse, he was the first to walk out. Surrendering was equivalent to letting go of all their dignity. If it was any other time, who knew how many people would laugh at him? However, they didn't. In the face of life and death, especially when the person they were dying for was not worth it, they wisely chose to survive. Only by surviving would a person have hope, a future, and the possibilities of the future. Riding on the white dragon horse and standing on a pile of rocks, young Chendong took in all of this with a natural smile on his face. Beta Persei, come here. Young master. Beta Persei, who was standing at the side, came to Yang Chendong's side. Go ahead and return to the main camp. Tell your logistics team to prepare the food. Also, prepare more silver, wine, cigarettes, and sabers. This young master wants to celebrate. Also, send a telegram to Tsushian City when you return. Tell them to quickly transport the next batch of resources I want. I want as much as you can. Don't think it's too much. Yang Chendong chuckled. Yes, young master. Beta Persei naturally nodded in agreement. However, out of worry, he still asked, young master, are the resources still being transported by sea? Yes, just like last time. Yang Chendong nodded. After the continuous battles, the strength of the 5-star army had increased tremendously. At this moment, when they were added to the new Gandusi region, there was naturally nothing to worry about. It would be best if they didn't provoke him. If they dared to provoke him, he didn't mind teaching them how to be an honest person. Beta Persei led a small group of people straight to the main camp. After the Mongolian cavalry put down their weapons, handed over their horses and became infantry, they followed the main force of the 5-star army back to the main camp dozens of miles behind them. At this moment, the sun was about to set and a touch of red hung on the horizon. Looking at this scene, young Chendong couldn't help but sing heroically, the sun sets in the west and the red clouds fly in the sky. The soldiers returned to the camp from their target practice. The red flowers on their chests reflect, young Chendong singing naturally inspired the 100 black cavalry guards around him. They also sang the song, coming back from target practice. After them, the independent regiment also sang loudly. It was mainly the soldiers from the 6 auxiliary battalions that had already been defeated. When these thousands of people shouted, it caused a huge commotion. It attracted the other regiments and battalions to sing as well. However, they had never heard this kind of military song before. They didn't know what the lyrics were or how to sing it. They could only sing along. Zhui Feng, Lu Jua, and Yella's expressions didn't look too good. Especially Commander Lu Jua. He had once been the commander of the auxiliary regiment and taught the soldiers how to sing military songs. But now, not many of his soldiers knew how to sing. He felt his face burning. He thought that after tonight, if he had the chance, he would definitely teach the soldiers how to sing. This would increase the morale of the soldiers and would be extremely useful and beneficial for the unity of the soldiers. Amidst the singing, under the setting sun, the army returned. The army was huge and winding like a dragon that had appeared out of nowhere. It was destined to break the tranquility of the grassland. The main force of the army had finally returned to the main camp. The 3 divisions of the Cold Front finally sent news that they had gone to do some hidden training. As Xianxia's army continued to grow, as the most elite of the Cold Front division, they also felt the pressure on their bodies increasing. It was also because of this hidden training that they didn't receive news of the army's battle in time. Fortunately, even without the Cold Front division, the 5-star army's strength was already very strong. Especially in this battle, the Nuzhan cavalry had performed very well. Although they had lost more than 1,000 cavalry in 2 consecutive battles, how could there be no deaths in a battle? Moreover, the number of soldiers that they lost could be re-enlisted from the captives. This was originally what Yang Qindong had promised the regimental commanders. Beta Persei came back early. The logistics battalion had already started cooking. The smell of meat spread everywhere, causing the 5-star army soldiers who had been fighting for a day and night to open their eyes wide. They couldn't help but swallow their saliva. Same old rules. Wash your hands clean before eating. After the meal, we will reward you according to your contributions and distribute the rewards. Yang Qindong boldly leapt onto the white dragon horse and laughed heartily as he spoke. His laughter also attracted the cheers of the soldiers. The meat was large and there was enough rice. After all, they were still in a state where they could face the enemy at any time. Thus, everyone couldn't drink as much as they wanted. Each person could only drink 2 taels. But even so, many of the soldiers still had a satisfied look on their faces and ate until their mouths were full of oil. And if they could smoke a cigarette after eating, it would definitely be a life comparable to that of a god. Who knew how many soldiers slowly closed their eyes because of this, in a state of enjoyment? Chapter 692. After the 2 battles, they had taken over 1,000 Tatar prisoners and another 3,000 Mongolian prisoners. These 4,000 people were still in the captive camp. They were lucky enough to see the 5-star army having a meal. In that era, it was not easy for soldiers to have a full meal. Usually, they would only have such an opportunity before a great battle, or when they had won a great battle and rewarded the army with a great victory. But even so, not all soldiers were able to enjoy such treatment. Generally speaking, a general would naturally have enough food to eat. The personal guards of the general could eat until they were 70% full, and the regular soldiers, the elites who charged at the front during battle, could eat until they were 60% full. As for the other soldiers, it was already considered good if they could eat until they were 50% full. It was often shown on television that the Mongolian army would eat mutton wherever they went. It was very appetizing. However, that was only for the generals. Normal soldiers could not enjoy such treatment. The soldiers could pick up the leftovers from the general's table. They could even chew on the bones. Normal soldiers could not even think about it. The people of that era were really poor. They only had 2 meals a day. Being able to fill their stomachs was already not bad. However, what they saw today was that almost all of the 5-star army soldiers, no matter if they were generals or normal soldiers, no matter if they were in charge of logistics, they could all eat until they were full. Even the captives who had not made up their minds had food placed in front of them so that they could eat as much as they wanted. This scene after scene shocked the captives. Some of the Mongolian soldiers who were smart among the captives took the initiative to greet some of the friendly Mongolian soldiers who were also part of the 5-star army. They used the chance to get close to them and asked some questions that they did not understand. Alright, we all know what you guys are thinking. Let me tell you, in the 5-star army, as long as we fight and train hard, we do not need to worry about food and drink. Not only that, after we eat and drink, we still have food for our minds. Look, this thing in my hand. Look, it can smoke. It is called a cigarette. What is a cigarette? Is it tasty? The Mongolian captives who saw it for the first time were interested. Of course you can't eat it. This thing is for sucking and smoking. Look at me. While speaking, the soldiers of the 5-star army took a light puff of their cigarettes. Then, they put the cigarette into their mouths. After inhaling a portion of it, they slowly spat out a portion of it. They looked extremely satisfied. Aya, this thing is very interesting. Can you give me one to try? One of the captive soldiers asked curiously. That won't do. This thing isn't for normal use. It can only be earned during military exploits. Hee, in this battle, I killed 4 enemies and injured 1. According to the rules, I can get 45 cigarettes, which is more than 2 packs. If I save some, it will be enough for me to live freely for a while. Ha ha ha. After saying this, the warrior turned around and left. It was as if his spoils of war would be snatched away by the captives if he stayed. One by one, the 5-star army veterans were called over by the captives. After showing off for a while, they turned around and left. Did you think that these veterans were so kind as to chat with the captives? They were only doing so because they had military orders and wanted to satisfy their vanity. However, it was this kind of teaching that greatly stimulated the captives who had no choice but to lower their heads. Originally, they had no choice but to surrender in order to survive. But now, it seemed that there was no harm in surrendering. It might even be a new hope in life. Yang Qindong didn't care about the captives. He firmly believed that the environment could change a person. His attention was focused on the situation in front of him. This time, he had defeated the Mongolian army with a large number of firearms. Presumably, the news of him coming to the prairie could no longer be hidden. In addition, he had defeated Har's 5,000 cavalry. In the outside world, there should be a lot of people paying attention to him. Since that was the case, he might as well not play hide and seek and stand out. Since he was going to make it public, Yang Qindong decided to take his first step in the prairie and build a city. Regardless of whether it was for the sake of logistical supplies or for the treatment of the injured and the expansion of their influence in the future, a stable city was a must. After standing in front of the sand table for a long time, he pointed to the land of Arakamaki that he had been studying for a long time. Arakamaki, in the Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region, Shi'i and Ji-Ren-Gaolei. According to Chindi's book, Emperor Taizu wrote, Arakamaki Wandong, Luji Na Tunshan, Mir Sutua, Hahai Laoyan, Ajar Havandu, Haleoj Lu and other places. Thou shalt reside there. From these records, Arakamaki was located in the easternmost part. Occupying this place was equivalent to having a residence. Moreover, it was also very close to the Baiming realm. In the future, no matter where he decided to extend his tentacles, it would be much more convenient. Most importantly, with a foundation, no matter what he did in the future, he would have fewer worries. What kind of people are there in Arakamaki? Pointing to the sand table, Yang Qindong asked Su Yunsheng, who was standing by the side. Reporting to the 6th young master, there are only about 500 Tatar cavalry there. You also know that the relationship between Baiming and the Walla is very tense. The closer we get to them, the more scarce our resources are. In order to survive, many of the people here have already moved away. Now, other than the cavalry, there are only about 1,000 Mongolian people. 1,000 people? That's too little. When we need to build a city, I'm afraid we won't even be able to find workers. However, this is the only thing we can do. Right, you've been to Arakamaki, right? How was the environment there? Although Yang Chendong felt a little regretful, how could there be anything perfect in the world? Su Yunxing hurriedly nodded. Yes, young master, I've been there. There were originally walls there. Later on, when Ming Qingzu went north to conquer the grasslands, it was repaired. The foundation is not bad, and the area it occupies is not small. Once there are enough resources, there shouldn't be a problem to build a large city. Good, tonight you will lead the reconnaissance team to take over Arakamaki, then announce to the outside world that it is the territory of our mercenaries. Yang Qindong nodded, his aura becoming very firm. He had fought with the Tatar and Mongol tribes separately, and it had attracted the attention of many people. If he did not immediately send troops to take over Arakamaki, even if it was to monitor him, it would be occupied by other forces. At that time, if he wanted to take over Arakamaki, he would have to fall out with one of the parties. Before he had a sufficient foundation, it would be best to avoid war if he could. If the Vala, Tatar, Mongol, or even the Northern Ming dynasty allied together to attack him, he was afraid that he would be exhausted to death with the few people he had. Yang Qindong gave the order, and Su Yunxing did not ask any questions. He nodded and agreed. Yes, after dark, our reconnaissance team will move out. Tomorrow morning, when the sun rises, this news will be spread all over the grasslands. Good, you can go. Call the 3rd Division Commander Wu Sheng and Political Commissar Chen Bo over. Yang Qindong did not even raise his head, and continued to look at the sand table in front of him, as if he had thought of something. After a while, the 2 senior officers of the 3rd Division of the Cold Front appeared in Yang Qindong's tent. How is it? Are you feeling regretful that you didn't get to fight the last battle? As soon as he saw the 2 young officers with the rank of senior colonel, Yang Qindong pointed at them and asked jokingly. Hiding in the grassland was different from hiding in the forest. Without the protection of trees, hiding in the open grassland would naturally require a higher level of training for a cavalry unit to be able to launch a sudden attack. However, under Yang Qindong's theoretical guidance, Wu Sheng and Chen Bo still did as they were told. They had already achieved some results. It was still difficult to hide a division in the open grasslands, but it was possible to hide a company or even a battalion. Just think about it. When both sides were about to fight, a powerful enemy cavalry suddenly charged out from the ground. It was self-evident what the outcome of the battle would be. Thus, even though the 3rd Division of the Cold Front didn't make it to the last battle, they did not regret it. This was because they knew that the 6th young master's ambitions were far-reaching. There would be more battles to fight in the future. As long as they could train their troops to become stronger, there would be no lack of opportunities for them to perform. There are some regrets, but we believe that gold will shine. The 3rd Division of the Cold Front will always be the strongest cavalry unit. Political Commissar Chen Bo chuckled and said confidently. Yes, the 3rd Division of the Cold Front will always be the strongest. Commander Wu Sheng said with even more confidence. His expression was filled with determination. Good. Seeing the confidence of his 2 subordinates, Yang Qindong was very happy. His subordinates had to have this kind of spirit. They had to be invincible. Only this kind of army could become a true elite unit. Only this kind of army could win every battle. Yang Qindong was very satisfied with Wu Sheng and Chen Bo's attitude. Then, he began to assign tasks. It's like this. This time, I will teach you a very important and difficult mission. Cross the Daxing and Mountain Range, cross the Liao River and Songhua River to reach Hai Town. There, you will receive a large amount of military resources from Crimson City and rush back here. Pointing at the location on the sand table, Yang Qindong said, I want the 3rd Division to be like Monkey Sun this time. Create havoc in the sky and make the Baiming army in the new, Urgan district not dare to say anything. If they try to stop you, you can use the banner of loyalty. If they still dare to stop you, you can teach them a lesson. How about it? Any questions? Chapter 693. In order to establish a foothold in a place, military supplies and logistics were always the most important. Humans couldn't live without eating, drinking, and defecating. In an environment like the grasslands where everything was lacking, it was obviously unrealistic to obtain materials locally. They could only rely on transportation. Opening up a sufficiently safe logistical path was one of the most important things at the moment. After thinking about it, Yang Chendong finally chose the new, Ergon metropolis for this logistical path. Although there were many Baiming army stations there, they had been closed off for a long time and didn't have enough strength. Such an army wasn't difficult to deal with. As long as the 3 divisions completed their mission well, they were completely confident that they could open up a safe passage. As long as there were no problems with logistics, Yang Chendong was confident that he could build a new city in the grasslands in the shortest time possible. A new city with great influence and far-reaching influence. When that time came, conquering the forces in this area would be twice the result with half the effort. As for how to intimidate the Baiming army stations in the new, Ergon metropolis with thunderous might, Yang Chendong thought about it and finally decided that the task would fall on the 3 divisions of the Lengfeng division. This was currently the strongest army under his command. Only they could have a powerful deterrent effect. In the face of such a powerful force, any schemes and tricks would be useless. Without waiting for the 2 divisions to make a decision, Yang Chendong added, "This mission is extremely important. If you have any questions, you can raise them. But once you agree, you must complete the mission perfectly. This cannot be discounted at all. Once the mission is completed, I will record it as a great merit. If the mission is not completed well, or if there are any accidents with the supplies, then you should prepare to be demoted. You will be directly sent to Beta Persei's logistics camp to be a cook." This was a complete demotion. Making a division commander a cook, this kind of punishment could be said to be heavy. Wu Sheng and Shen Bo couldn't help but be stunned, but they quickly recovered and said in unison, "Sixth young master, please don't worry. We will definitely complete the mission perfectly. If we can't do it well, we don't need to be cooks anymore. We'll just offer our heads." Wu Sheng was a standard soldier. The bigger the battle, the more excited he was. It was understandable that he would say something like that. It was also in line with his usual style of doing things. As a political commissar, Chen Bo was full of scholarly aura. Unexpectedly, he could say such words, which surprised Yang Chendong. He looked at the 2 of them carefully and nodded after a long time. "Okay, I'll remember your words. Young Master Ben is looking forward to your next performance. Pack up and leave early tomorrow morning." Chen Bo's performance really made Yang Chendong's eyes light up. He even thought that since this person's character was so determined, then he should test him a little more. If there were no problems, then this person could be trained as a military supervisor in the future. It seemed like a waste for such a hot-blooded officer to become a political cadre. Chen Bo didn't know that his performance in Yang Chendong's eyes would give birth to such a realization. After he and Wu Xing gave a standard military salute, he left the command tent and called for an emergency meeting with the officers of the 3 divisions. After the 2 of them left, Yang Chendong's eyes fell on the map again. His eyes still fell on Arakumaki, the old city built by the great Ming Dynasty in the grasslands. He imagined that after tonight's reconnaissance battalion took action, this city would belong to him. It would also become his first strong force in the grasslands. At this moment, he even thought of a name for this new city. Since it was going to start here, then it would be called the First City. Arakumaki, this city that had been abandoned by the great Ming Dynasty, and who knew how many times it had changed owners, now looked extremely desolate. There were no traces of people walking around in the city at all. Only the dilapidated walls could be seen from time to time, and one could imagine the former glory of this place. It wasn't the first time Su Yunsheng came here. But for tonight's military operation, he once again disguised himself and appeared here. In order to not attract attention, he only brought 2 of his trusted aides and the reconnaissance battalion's 1st company commander, Yenda, a battalion commander. There are only 500 enemy cavalry and 1,000 Mongolian civilians. If we want to take over this place, why do we need to be so careful? I just need to move out and the mission will be completed. Yan De was very dissatisfied with the battalion commander's cautiousness. In his view, there was no need to spend so much effort on such a deserted city. Caution is the parent of safety. Su Yunxing shook his head. Then, as if he thought of something, he looked up at Yan De and said, Commander Yan, people can have pride, but they can't have arrogance. If you continue to look down on everything like this, I will consider transferring you out of the reconnaissance battalion. Su Yunxing suddenly became serious, and Yan De was really afraid. With his ability, he was more than qualified to be a battalion commander in any regiment. Even if he went to the 3 divisions of the Cold Front, it wouldn't be a problem for him to be a battalion commander. But the position of the reconnaissance battalion was too important. Any battalion commander who wanted to see the 6th young master would be able to see the young master. So, he would rather be a company commander here than go to another unit. This was because he saw the importance of the reconnaissance battalion. Battalion commander, I was wrong. I am actually very careful when doing things. Yan De immediately admitted his mistake. In reality, he was a very careful person. Otherwise, he wouldn't have become the company commander of the reconnaissance battalion's 1st company. Naturally, Su Yunxing was someone who understood this principle, so he just reminded the other party. If he was really not satisfied, he wouldn't have reminded him and would have directly transferred him away. With the interlude just now, when Su Yunxing wanted to do something, Yan De just followed at the side and didn't say anything. The 4 of them walked like this and unknowingly came to a house in the city. Here, they saw an old man resting outside the door. Looking at the old man's appearance, he was in his 50s. At that time, he was already considered a very old man. Old brother, how old are you? Su Yunxing had imprinted almost every corner of the city and every street in his mind. He had basically completed his mission and wanted to take a rest. When he saw the old man, he walked over without thinking and asked in Mongolian. He sat down beside the old man. The old man had already noticed Su Yunxing and the other 3. Seeing them sit down beside him, he wasn't surprised. Instead, he smiled and answered. This old man is 56 this year. Oh, that's still a very old man. Su Yunxing said casually. You can say that. The old man chuckled. His face was filled with reminiscence, and the vicissitudes of life were written all over his face. Seeing that the old man seemed to be reminiscing about something, Su Yunxing didn't disturb him. Instead, he reached into his bosom and took out a piece of dried meat that he always carried with him. He also took out a bottle of old wine from the hands of 2 bodyguards and placed it in front of the old man. If you want to get what you want from others, you have to pay first. This was what Yang Chendong always said. Now, the scouts who were good at gathering information had learned most of it. The wine and meat that was suddenly placed in front of him made the old man, who was originally sitting at the door basking in the sun, stunned. Then, the way he looked at Su Yunxing and the other 3 changed. Allowing the old man to size them up in front of him, Su Yunxing only smiled and didn't say anything. But unexpectedly, the old man suddenly said, although you are dressed like Mongolians, but if this old man didn't guess wrongly, you should be people of the Ming Dynasty, and soldiers of the Ming Dynasty. Suddenly being exposed, the faces of Yan De and the 2 bodyguards couldn't help but tighten. They even instinctively wanted to pull out their swords to silence the old man. On the other hand, Su Yunxing's expression didn't change, and his heart didn't beat fast. He casually raised his arm and stopped the actions of the 3 bodyguards. He smiled and looked at the old man and asked, but I don't know why old brother thinks so. Hee hee. The old man didn't seem to notice the actions of the 3 bodyguards. He casually smiled and said, only people of the Ming Dynasty who understand etiquette would treat guests like this. If you were really Mongolians, you definitely wouldn't be so polite to this old man. So it was because he was too polite that it aroused the suspicion of the other party. Su Yunxing reflected in his heart. Should the scouts learn to be more domineering when they go out to do things in the future? While his heart was still thinking about this unintentional loophole, the old man spoke again. Although your Mongolian can be considered authentic, but let's talk in Chinese. AI, speaking of which, I haven't spoken Chinese in a long time. Oh. Old brother is also a Han? Su Yunxing's interest was immediately piqued. After all, other than his comrades, to be able to meet a fellow Han here was still very delightful. I can be considered half Han. My father was a Ming Dynasty man. Later on, he met a grassland woman and settled down here, giving birth to me. The old man said somewhat embarrassedly. After all, in that era, if one's blood wasn't pure, then one was a mixed blood. People would look down on them. I see. Su Yunxing didn't have any intention of looking down on the old man. On the contrary, he was very curious about the old man's behavior in front of him. He had a feeling that this old man had some stories. Old brother, I wonder if you can tell me your name? Name? The old man said meaningfully. Then, he sank into his memories for a while before saying, this old man's Mongolian name is Zhang Shibao, Han name is Zhang Shibao. So it's old Master Zhang. Nice to meet you. Su Yunxing very politely clasped his fist and didn't mention the old man's Mongolian name. He only said that it was a Han name to express a kind of closeness. Then, he said something that shocked Yan De and the two bodyguards behind him. This little one's name is Su Yunxing. I'm the battalion commander of the mercenary scouts under the Duke of Loyalty. Su Yunxing actually directly revealed his identity. This was definitely not allowed by the rules of the scouts. Unless it was one of their own, as a scout, he absolutely couldn't reveal his identity. As the battalion commander, it was impossible for Su Yunxing not to know this. But he still did so. Naturally, Yan De and the two bodyguards were puzzled. You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.